Our story begins with the return of Sakurako, the conqueror of the Bal Dungeon, and everyone is excited to see her. They know that the Bal Dungeon, which appeared in Russia 6 years ago, was an S-rank dungeon that no player in the world had been able to clear. This means that clearing it is a historic achievement for humanity, and that achievement rests in Sakurako's hands. Orami Sakurako, the 100 Flower Blooming Guildmaster, an S-rank player ranked 3rd overall with a Grand Sorcerer class, and the Nine-Tailed Fox skill, proudly tells her fans that this outcome was expected. A reporter then asks her if she thinks the Lulu Heart Dungeon, which is considered the most difficult dungeon in history, might soon be cleared. Others speculate that if anyone could do it, it would be Sakurako. She smirks at the mention of the ultimate goal of all players, but tells everyone it has nothing to do with her. She arrogantly announces that she clears dungeons for herself. Then she walks off toward her car as reporters chase after her, trying to question her further, but she ignores them. Meanwhile, in our protagonist Kaki Yukari's house, he is watching Sakurako's video and realizes it's about time for his part-time job. He stands up to change his clothes, wondering if he remembered correctly that his job today was transporting supplies to a dungeon. He then recalls Sakurako's arrogant announcement about clearing dungeons for herself and falls silent for a moment. Later, on a city rooftop, he stands gazing at the dungeon tower in front of him, thinking that even he wishes he could challenge it. The Lulu Heart Dungeon is the first dungeon to have appeared in this world and is the most difficult dungeon globally, with no one ever having cleared it. Every time the news introduces a new player, Yukari dreams that one day he could be one of them, but it never happens. When he was evaluated, the specialists apologized and told him he was skillless and therefore unable to enter dungeons. Still, he remained persistent and tried to challenge dungeons. However, players didn't want to work with someone who was skillless and bullied him, calling him useless. Even his coworker advised him to stop dreaming, insisting that he didn't mean to be harsh, but was simply being a friend, saying he understood Yukari didn't want to accept it. But the truth was that he had no talent. Skillless, a term used for those who cannot receive the benefits of skills and are unable to become players. If a skillless person enters a dungeon, 90% of them die, and the remaining 10% go missing. Because of this, people without skills are no longer allowed to be involved with dungeon gates. Yukari knows in his mind that he is skillless and not one of the chosen ones, and yet he still can't give up. So he continues working part-time jobs related to dungeons, thinking how foolish he is for doing so. He looks at his new sword sadly, knowing that even though he bought it, there may never be a day when he gets to use it. Suddenly, the ground shakes and everyone is shocked by a loud growl. The system then issues a warning. A dungeon break has occurred. From the Panam dungeon, the plague that spreads in solitude is descending. The nun who devours the future from the Oryx dungeon and the lamb mistaken for all time from the Forest dungeon also emerge. Yukari and other citizens begin to flee while the system repeatedly warns that a swarm of the lamb mistaken for all time continues to pour out. One of the monsters chases him. He runs with all his might, wondering why there are monsters in the middle of the city and what on earth is happening. He swings his sword backward to slash at the monster, but is shocked when the sword he just bought breaks in half without even scratching it. He looks back in fear and sees the monster's mouth about to bite him. He thinks he's going to die. Luckily, someone powerful appears just in time and uses the Scarlet Leafly Flash skill to slash the monster into pieces. She lands in front of him and asks if he is hurt. He is stunned when he sees Oramachi Sierra, a member of the 100 Flower Blooming Guild, an S-rank player ranked 8th with a Swordmaster class and the Eye of Truth skill. He stutters a thank you for saving him. She turns around and explains that monsters are overflowing from dungeons all over the world and that the area is especially dangerous, so he must flee at once. Yet, he asks if there's anything he can do to help. She replies with concern on her face that the only thing he can do right now is run away. He wants to object, but he knows better than anyone that he can't do anything. He replies that she's probably right. Sarah then walks forward and shouts for him to run now. He obeys and runs in the opposite direction, leaving Sarah behind to face the swarm of monsters, her eyes closed in despair and guilt. Minutes later, he stopped running to catch his breath and hid behind a nearby car park. Yet he noticed that no matter where he ran, there were monsters. He continued running, knowing the main streets were too exposed and he had to escape into the alleyways. But he was shocked when he saw a lady lying in a pool of blood and asked her worriedly if she was okay. The lady simply asked him back if he was human. He bent down next to her, telling her they needed to get her to a hospital quickly. Knowing that with wounds like hers, there was no way to save her, he hesitated but remembered Sierra, who had saved him. He told himself that he couldn't just run away again, that there had to be something he could do. He was about to grab her and say he would take her somewhere safe, but she slapped his hand away and shouted at him not to touch her. She added that she hadn't fallen so low as to need help from a mere human, but he grabbed her forcefully, shocking her. She shouted, asking if she hadn't already told him not to touch her. He placed her on his back and ran with all his might. While she kept shouting at him to let her go, he simply shouted back for her to hold on because they were running. Meanwhile, the plague dragon that spread in solitude flew above the city, gathered power in its mouth, and released it downward, causing a massive explosion that turned everything to dust. Yukari, who was carrying the lady, was caught in the blast and thrown violently to the ground. He slammed and bounced a few times before stopping himself from rolling. He immediately sat up, trying to comprehend what had just happened. But when he looked back, he was shocked to see the dragon's eyes staring directly at him. He froze in fear, but grew confused when the dragon looked past him and began scanning the area, showing no interest in him. He wondered why it wasn't attacking. Perhaps it was searching for something. Snapping out of it, he realized he needed to help the lady. He frantically searched and found her lying on the ground nearby. He lifted her back onto his back and began running again. She looked at him and calmly asked why he kept resisting so much. She explained that even if they kept running, both of them would die anyway, and asked if that wasn't obvious. But he kept running and replied that she was absolutely right. Yet even so, that wasn't a reason to do nothing. He said he would simply do what he could right now, which surprised her. She then asked him if, in other words, he wanted to change the situation. He replied that he did and added that if he could, he'd even save the world. But he knew he couldn't. That was why, at the very least, he just wanted to save her. This surprised her even more. She calmly responded by saying, "Is that so?" and told him that their interests aligned. She pushed him away slightly, admitting she hated the idea of relying on a fragile human, but since he was the only vessel available, she had no choice. She offered him the chance to save the world in exchange for his soul. He asked how she could even do that, and she answered that it would be by going back to the past and starting over. She then ordered him to state his name, and he replied that his name was Kanaki Yukari. She cast a magic circle with overwhelming dark power, which shocked him. She introduced herself as Lulu Heart, the soul-devouring demon lord and ruler of the Lulu Heart dungeon. He couldn't believe he was seeing a demon lord. He then saw her take out a bright star and heard her say that the Lulu Heart dungeon was a golden memory that must never be lost. She squeezed the star and told him she was entrusting its fate to him. Suddenly, a strong force dragged him away, and the system displayed a message stating that although his life was empty, he had risked it to save the girl in the world. In recognition of his deed, the round table granted him a skill. However, the system encountered an error. It detected that he lacked talent and causality. The system began reviewing his status, and the round table created a skill suitable for him as a special exception. The system then generated a skill and revealed that he had been granted the skill Lost Man, a skill that loses oneself with an unknown rank. The system expressed respect and bestowed a blessing for his resolve to lose everything. A moment later, he opened his eyes and sat up in shock. He looked at his tablet and saw news about a new Baal dungeon appearing in Russia. He couldn't believe it, knowing that was a story from 6 years ago. He was even more shocked when he saw the date on his phone, wondering why it showed a date from 6 years ago. Suddenly, a lady with a sharp horn spoke, telling him that he had finally woken up. She smiled at him, causing him to drop his phone in horror as he wondered what had happened. Years ago, the Tower of Beginnings suddenly appeared in Shinjuku, and it was called the Lulu Heart Dungeon. As if in response, dungeon towers began emerging one after another across the world, and within them resided supernatural monsters. In contrast, those who awakened to extraordinary powers and skills also began to appear. These individuals were called players. Skills allowed their wielders to perform feats impossible for ordinary humans, defying the very laws of physics. Those chosen by skills ventured into dungeons, marking the beginning of a new era centered around them. In the present, a young Lulu Heart smiles at him, and in panic, he asks her what has happened. She simply replies that he has regressed, which confuses him even more. She then explains that he has regressed roughly 6 years into the past, and it was the result of the demon lord Lulu Heart's grand magic. He asks her if going back in time is even possible, and she proudly replies that nothing is impossible for her. However, she admits that she lost most of her magical power. which is why she ended up in such an adorable form, and informs him that no one else can see her but him. He then realizes that she seems somewhat familiar. Recalling the older Lulu heart, she tells him that she has fulfilled her part of the contract, so now it's his turn to fulfill his. He will be working to stop the dungeon break. He responds that he'd love to help, but he has no idea what to do. She explains that the dungeon break was a calamity caused by demon lords ruling over other dungeons. Their objective was to invade her Lulu Heart dungeon, which held the greatest concentration of magical power in the world. She adds that since they couldn't defeat someone as powerful as her alone, they formed an alliance across all dungeons. This means that if they systematically conquer every dungeon in this world, they can prevent that future from happening. However, he responds that it's really hard for him to say, but he admits he's incredibly weak and has no skills. He adds that he has never even set foot inside a dungeon before. Yet he is shocked when she asks, "What about it?" and tells him it doesn't matter in the slightest. What's important is his resolve. She explains to him that to a demon lord like her, humans are all the same, so he shouldn't worry. She assures him that she will personally train him to become the strongest. She then firmly and confidently swears to him that he will surpass the limits of humanity and protect her beloved Lulu Heart dungeon. A moment later in the Frank dungeon, Lemura, they arrive. He looks around as it's his first time stepping into a dungeon, but instead of excitement, he feels a sense of restlessness. He then asks her about the training she mentioned. She releases her power floating in the air and replies that he'll understand once they start. Seeing her dark magical power, he panics, shouting for her to wait a moment and asking what she's about to do. But she simply reaches out and places her hand on his chest, making him scream in pain. He feels dizzy and wonders what is happening. His head begins to ache so badly it feels like it's splitting. Yet she calmly explains that she infused her magic directly into his magical circuits. Now, even someone as skillless as him should be able to sense magic. He kneels on the ground in pain as her magic spreads through his body, and he wonders what she's talking about. She tells him that it seems by acquiring a skill, he also obtained a magical circuit to handle mana, but he doesn't listen. His body is overwhelmed with pain, burning from the inside. He can't think properly and feels himself slowly losing consciousness. At that moment, he wishes there were no pain. The system detects his desire to lose pain, and because of it, he meets the conditions of his unique skill, Lost Man. Suddenly, he feels the pain vanish. When he looks up, the system shows him that the pain has been lost. However, since the skill is only level 1, the effect duration is limited. He couldn't believe that the pain was gone and felt something circulating throughout his body. He looked at his hand and saw magical power, prompting him to ask if it was mana. He knew that mana was essential for using skills in class magic, and remembered that in the world before his regression, he couldn't even sense it. He clenched his hand, overjoyed to see magical power flowing from his body. Lulu Heart, who saw his system as well, asked him if she was right in saying that his skill was a pretty convenient ability. She remarked that humans had too many unnecessary things. Then she decided to begin their training and instructed him to try gathering the mana flowing through his body into his legs. She infused her mana into his legs while explaining that if he could control mana well enough, he could move beyond human limits. He focused intently and tried his best to gather his mana into his legs. For a second, he managed to channel some mana there, but it quickly spread back through his body. He told her that he couldn't control it properly. Whenever he tried to gather mana into his legs, it dispersed midway. She responded that she hadn't expected him to succeed from the start, which surprised him. He commented that she was kinder than he expected, admitting that he thought she would push him to get it right immediately. However, she smirked and laughingly told him that his will and ability didn't matter in the slightest. Confused, he asked what the hell that was supposed to mean. Then he noticed a sound around them and asked her if she heard it too. Suddenly, a monster appeared, rushing toward him. He froze for a second, then snapped to attention when he realized it was an orc. The orc chased after him as he ran, shouting in panic, asking what was happening and why there was an orc at the entrance. Floating beside him, she reminded him that even weakened, he had absorbed the demon lord. To a monster, that was like the finest delicacy appearing before its eyes. She then excitedly told him that monsters would now come to devour him. Meanwhile, she gracefully floated around with tea and cake while he ran for his life, shouting that he had never fought before. She calmly sat down midair and explained that if he infused mana into his legs and accelerated, he should be able to escape. He shouted back that was exactly what he couldn't do, which was why he was in trouble. She only looked confused at his complaint and asked if she was right in thinking that he should just get better at it. He shouted at her that she was the worst. The orc raised its spiked hammer and swung it down at him. In the emergency situation, he managed to channel mana into his legs and, in a panic, strengthened them. He jumped away just in time, avoiding the hammer that would have crushed him, leaving the orc shocked. A short distance away, he stopped and realized that for a moment, mana had surged into his legs, evident from the deep footprint left behind. He felt his entire body overflowing with power and was thrilled to experience mana manipulation for the first time. Lulu Heart told him it was fine to be amazed, but he would die if he didn't act. Looking up, he saw more massive orcs standing in front of him. One of them swung its hammer down, and he froze in fear, thinking this was the end. The orc struck him and crushed him in one hit. The system displayed that he had died, and the round table would retrieve his skills. But then he heard Lulu Heart's voice saying, "That won't do." She asked why he was dying and leaving her behind, as if she'd ever allow that. A demon hand then appeared, shattering the system's attempt to retrieve his skill. The system errored briefly and displayed a new message. Interference by Demon Lord Lulu Heart had prevented skill retrieval. Due to the contract between him and Lulu Heart, he would now return to 1 hour before. He then woke up and screamed in fear, realizing he was about to be hit by the spiked hammer. Yet Lulu Heart greeted him with a cheerful "good morning" and asked if he had a nice sleep. She then drew out her mana and asked if they should resume. Before he could finish asking what she was doing, she placed her hand on his chest again and sent her mana into his mana circuit once more, causing him to scream in pain. However, he remembered the sensation from before, and just minutes later, the system activated his Lostman skill, which relieved him of the pain. Furious, he asked her what she was doing, but she simply asked him back if he had time to be spouting nonsense. At that moment, he felt a presence behind him. Fortunately, he jumped away in time before he was crushed again. He began to run while shouting that he thought he had died. Lulu Heart confirmed that he had died. He'd been crushed by an orc and turned into mincemeat. He asked her why he was alive again. She explained that there was a death return contract between them. When he dies, he returns to the world 1 hour before. He was confused, but there was no time to think about it. He kept running. Lulu Heart then told him not to worry about unnecessary things because the only thing he needed to know was that until he stops the dungeon break, he can't die permanently. They were in this together, and there was no way she'd allow him to die and leave her behind. She then shouted at him to show her his resolve. The orc caught up to him, but once again, he managed to channel mana into his legs and jumped away to dodge its attack. Lulu Heart praised him, saying his reaction was better than the first time. She admitted that she thought it would take longer for him to control magic, but it seemed dying once had an effect. She then formed a sword using her magical power and told him that if he was going to become strong enough to prevent the dungeon break, he couldn't keep running away forever. He accepted the sword, knowing he hadn't come back just to keep fleeing from orcs. He couldn't stay stuck there. She walked closer to him and told him that she would only say this once, so he should pay attention. She began explaining that the magic circuits inside him, the parts that connect to the magic overflowing in the world, were linked to his soul. In other words, with a strong will, he could control magic. But to do that, he needed a strong desire, which could be a passionate wish to grow stronger, or even the arrogance of wanting to save the world. She then asked him what exactly he desired. He remembered the dragon that had effortlessly destroyed the city and replied that he wanted to stop the dungeon and he wanted to become strong. The orc raised its hammer and swung it at him, but he bent his body low to dodge it. He immediately sat up and dashed toward the orc, driven by his new determination. Raising his sword, he channeled his mana into the blade, which allowed him to slice the orc cleanly in half with a single swing. He then caught his breath in exhaustion, but he was glad he had done it. For the first time, he had defeated a monster. Lulu Heart reminded him that she had told him he could do it if he tried, and admitted that she was planning to have him die about 100 times to get his body used to magic. But thanks to his Lostman skill, it had saved them both some trouble, making him realize once again that Lulu Heart was really the worst. They suddenly heard footsteps rushing toward them and saw a large group of orcs charging forward. Lulu Heart excitedly shouted to him that the next wave was coming. He quickly channeled mana into his legs and jumped above the oncoming orcs, running through the air at high speed as he felt magic coursing through his entire body. Descending towards the orc, he slashed one of the orcs cleanly in half. Dodging another orc's attack, He spun his body and sliced through it with one smooth swing. His body, moving beyond imagination, responded with precision. With growing confidence, he continued slashing through the orcs around him. 1 hour later, Lulu Heart praised him for defeating 10 orcs in a single hour, calling it pretty good for a beginner. He added that if he kept it up, he would grow even stronger. However, she remained silent. Suddenly, they heard someone screaming in the distance. Quietly approaching the sound, they saw a man holding a blood-drenched knife, shouting at someone, calling them an idiot, a real idiot. The man scolded a young woman for not abandoning the others, saying she might have won if she had. He then teasingly addressed her by name, or Machi Sierra. She was younger with her Eye of Truth skill active, but she didn't have a class yet and was only frank. The man told Sora that she really had good eyes, then raised his knife and shouted that he was right to target her. Sora remained calm even as the knife neared her face. But before the blade struck, Yukari appeared just in time, blocking the attack with his sword and shouting that he wouldn't let him do it. Furiously, Yukari demanded if the man understood what he was doing, but the man stronger than him easily pushed him back and calmly asked who the hell he was. Sarah shouted that the man was a serial killer who targeted beginners, and she cried out in concern, urging Yukari to run away. He looked back and recognized her. Sierra, the S-rank player who had helped him in the world before his regression. The man, Akazuki K, pushed Yukari again and began slashing at him with his knife, tauntingly asking if he really had time to be looking away. Eventually, Yukari's sword was knocked from his hand. Realizing he had used too much magic and couldn't summon any strength, Kei told him he was full of openings, then activated Wave of Terror Level 3, which inflicted fear. The system displayed that Yukari was affected by terror status. He would feel intense fear toward Akazuki Kei, be unable to use skills, and have reduced stats for a certain period of time. Kei struck him with his knife, stabbing him through the abdomen. Yukari screamed in pain as the blade pierced him. Kei pulled the knife out and calmly turned his attention back to Sierra, who was already badly injured. Still conscious, Yukari managed to tell him to stop, but Kei continued forward. He knelt beside Sierra, saying he just wanted to understand what those skills were all about. Yukari could only watch in horror as Sierra screamed. Kei had stabbed her eye. Kei then muttered to Sarah and the other two corpses that he hoped to discover something when he dissected them. He stabbed Sarah's eye again and continued to stab her repeatedly, her screams growing louder with each stab. Yukari, furious and heartbroken, tried to move, but his bleeding intensified. He screamed at Kei to stop and remembered how in the previous timeline, Sierra had saved him, but now he could do nothing to save her. Kei laughed maniacally and grabbed his hair, while he thought to himself that he was too weak, too powerless, that this was why it was happening. Kei began stabbing him over and over until Yukari was killed. But as before, due to the contract, he returned to 1 hour prior. He woke up in the same place where he had just defeated 10 orcs. He turned to Luluart and told her that he had a favor to ask. She smiled, intrigued, and told him to go ahead and say it. He stood up and declared confidently that he wanted her to make him stronger, no matter how many times he had to die, because he wanted to defeat that murderer. She simply responded that she got it and told him that she couldn't care less about that little girl. But if this was what was driving him, then she'd let him go wild and personally whip him into shape. A moment later, Kei told Sarah that even though she had just become a player today, it was impressive how well she was holding out against his killing skills. He added that she was definitely Sakurako's sister, but he commented, today's dungeon was pretty thin on monsters. Kei then dashed toward her, shouting that he would take his sweet time breaking her. Yet Sierra remained calm and waited for him to get closer. But before the knife could reach her, Yukari appeared out of nowhere and blocked the strike. Kei demanded to know who the hell he was and whether he knew Sierra. Sarah collapsed on her knees in pain, shouted at Yukari to get out of there immediately because Kei targeted beginners. But Yukari stood his ground, doing his best to block Kei's attacks. He told Sierra to leave Kei to him. He would handle it from here. Unfortunately for him, he died at Kei's hands again. He remembered hearing about a beginner killer even before going back in time. But Sarah had never suffered such serious injuries before. He thought it must be his fault since he had lured all the dungeon's orcs away. Kei had free reign to strike. He knew he couldn't change that fact now. Even with Lulu Heart's contract, he couldn't return to a point earlier than his first death. He guessed that if he'd killed the orcs faster, it might not have happened. Once more, he thought everything had happened because he was weak. Then he died again. When he died for the third time, Lulu Heart lectured him, saying his swordplay was too straightforward, that killing Kay required a sneakier approach. On the fourth try, she told him to pay attention to the flow of his movements and to stop separating offense and defense. He needed to connect everything fluidly. On the fifth, she yelled that his mana was disrupted again and warned him never to lose focus no matter what was happening. On the sixth, she taught him to read his opponent's mana and assured him that by doing so, he would naturally anticipate their next move. On the seventh, she told him Kay's strategy relied heavily on counters, so Yukari needed to bait him into attacking. On the eighth attempt, Sierra, who had been watching, asked why he was going so far for them. On the 10th death, Luluhart asked if he wasn't afraid of dying. He replied that he had nothing left, and if he didn't put everything on the line, he wouldn't be able to save anyone, even if it cost him his life. This amazed and surprised Luluhart at the same time. He knew that if he gave up now, the dungeon break would result in countless deaths. And when weighing the lives of everyone else against his own pain, the choice was obvious. Luluhart silently watched him continue trying to defeat the murderer and die once more. She remembered all the people she had seen in dungeons, how they abandoned their teammates without hesitation and only looked out for themselves. That's why she couldn't understand why Yukari kept sacrificing himself for others. Yukari died again and again at the murderer's hands for hours until Kay was finally impressed by how Yukari read his movements as if it were his first time. He didn't realize Yukari had died so many times that he could now predict Kay's actions instinctively. Kay arrogantly told him that the difference between them was their commitment to dying, that Yukari didn't have it in him. Yukari was momentarily confused and wondered if even after all this, his resolve still wasn't enough. But then he stood up thinking to himself, even so, and even then, he wouldn't let anyone die. Luluhart was speechless for a moment before shouting to him that she hadn't expected him to come this far. So now she would tell him what was missing, the final piece he needed. She told him the missing piece was recognizing how strong he had already become. Her words shocked and stunned him into silence. He then looked away, not knowing how to respond. Luluhart told him he was still stuck seeing himself as weak. It was true that he had no talent, no skills, and no mana in the past, yet he kept coming back, even after dying over and over. Even though he could have abandoned that little girl and run, he didn't. He was about to argue with her about abandoning Sierra, but she cut him off, stating that he hadn't run. And no matter how many times he lost his life, he had chosen to keep fighting. That was why he had grown strong. She floated closer to him, pointed at him, and told him that even she, the demon lord, acknowledged his strength. She questioned why he was still moping and ordered him to stand up and lift his head. He obeyed. Kay swung the knife in his direction, but he easily dodged it. Luluhart pointed out that he could now read Kay's knife movements. Kay was shocked when he saw Yukari bend down and swing his sword to counterattack, which Kay blocked. Luluhart encouraged Yukari to swing his blade with everything he had, and Yukari managed to push Kay away with his sword, despite Kay using his knife to resist. Luluhart then remarked that Yukari could cut Kay down now, and he saw that he had slashed Kay's hand as well. She pressed him further, demanding to know how long he would continue, pretending he was weak, and shouted for him to accept his strength. Yukari noticed Kay's right foot move back and immediately recognized that a thrust was coming, which he dodged. He predicted Kay's next overhead slash and also foresaw the follow-up kick. He dodged both moves with precision, leaving Kay visibly confused and wondering about the sudden change. Yukari swung his sword at Kay again, but Kay dodged it. However, Kay was shaken. A moment ago, Yukari had been nothing more than a clueless boy who couldn't swing a sword properly, a weakling who had been covering in fear. Now Kay, who was being pushed back, questioned how he was losing to someone who had been so helpless. Yukari landed another slash on Kay's arm. He saw Kay begin to panic and knew this was his opportunity. He raised his sword and activated his Lostman skill, nullifying the fear Kay had planted in him. With mana surging into his sword, he swung it down toward Kay. Kay quickly gathered his magic power into his hand, insulted him for letting his guard down, and released another wave of fear. Yukari understood that Kay's skill relied on amplifying fear when detecting an opening. But since he had already nullified the emotion with his skill, Kay's power no longer worked on him. Fear had been fully removed from his system. The fear amplification failed. Kay was stunned. He couldn't believe his skill had been canceled. Desperate, he swung his knife at Yukari, arrogantly claiming that there was no way he could block an attack at such close range. Yukari activated Lostman again, nullifying pain just before the knife hit. Blood splattered, but he remained standing. Kay shouted that it was his win. Yukari, unfazed, simply smirked. Kay was stunned to see that Yukari had caught the knife with his bare hand. He questioned how Yukari was reading all of his moves and why none of his skills were working. Yukari exhaled and told Kay that at last he had caught up to him. Kay, overwhelmed with fear, asked who on earth he was. Yukari didn't answer and instead slashed at Kay's abdomen, declaring that it was over. Kay fell flat on the ground, lying in his own blood. But even then, he shouted that there was no way he could lose to a weakling like him. Yukari admitted that he had been killed by Kay 187 times, yet the one still standing in the end was him. Afterward, members of the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild, to which Sierra belonged, arrived to provide support and treatment for their injuries. Sarah approached him, sincerely apologizing and swearing that she would make amends, but he simply told her that no one had died, and that was enough. His words surprised her. Sarah and the others then bowed to him and thanked him with all their hearts. A moment later, as he stepped out of the Frank dungeon, Lulu Hart reminded him that it had taken quite some time after returning from his previous death. Even so, she smiled at him and praised him for doing a great job. He remained silent for a moment until his tears began to fall, and he quietly thanked her. She smiled at his reaction and teasingly asked why he was crying over something like that. She then reminded him that their goal was to stop the dungeon break, and in order to do that, they would have to surpass the so-called S-rank players. Lulu Hart raised her finger and declared that if she had to say, he would become a Demon Lord level player. He laughed and asked her what that even meant, but admitted that Demon Lord level didn't sound so bad. He then swore to her that he would become as strong as she was. Lulu floated into the air excitedly and warned him that her training would be tough. He responded that he would do his best and then he would change that future. The next day, he arrived at the Japan Player Association's Shinjuku branch and followed an employee inside. The staff member informed him that he had just been registered as a player, but with his current battle record, ranking up should be possible very soon. He reached out to touch the large globe in the center and replied that he understood. The woman couldn't believe that he had not only hunted orcs, but also defeated the wanted murderer Kay, and all on his first day of player registration. She wondered if it was really possible, though there were suspicions that Kay had falsely reported his rank to enter beginner dungeons. Kay had still been strong enough to pose a serious threat. The globe activated, and Yukari was shocked when the system displayed that his contribution had exceeded the required threshold. He was awarded the title of E-rank player. The system applied a correction to his status, increasing his overall stats, magic circuits by 2, and mana capacity. Additionally, his skill Lost leveled up to level 2, which increased the effect duration by 3 and expanded the range of targets that could be lost. He knew that with this, he had finally become an E-rank player. At last, he could choose his class. Later, he was waiting inside a building when a woman entered, thanking him for waiting and apologizing for calling him there on such short notice. He looked back and was surprised to see the elegant Sierra approaching him. She noticed him staring and asked if something was the matter. He awkwardly replied that it was nothing, but in that moment, he realized that he had forgotten because of everything that had happened, that Sierra was the daughter of the Oromachi conglomerate, meaning she was a true high-class lady. He remembered that before his regression, Sarah had become an S-rank player who rose to 8th place in the world. A super genius, she stood beside her sister, Sakurako, another prodigy, and together they reigned at the top of Japan. Sarah wielded a powerful mental type skill, one of the highest tier skills in the pregression world. It was a skill that could see through falsehoods. Not only could it detect lies and deception, but it also exposed feints in battle. Saya thanked him again for what had happened the day before and told him that the reason she was alive was entirely because of him. But he clarified that it was because she had protected the other two. Yukari later discovered that Sierra had never attempted a dungeon raid before, and yet she managed to keep fighting Kay while protecting 2 injured people, something he could hardly believe. She then held his hand and told him that hearing those words made her feel a little better, causing him to blush as she stood a little too close. They then entered a small cafe where Sierra informed him that she would explain about classes as they had discussed the day before. She asked if they should proceed with the class selection, admitting that it might be a bit pushy of her. She went on to explain that a job class was something a player could choose upon reaching E rank. It was similar to choosing a profession, and classes were broadly divided into physical-based, magic-based and mental-based categories. She added that a person's class was generally determined by their personality and abilities, and that their skills were reflected accordingly. For physical-based classes, examples included warriors, knights, and thieves. In magic-based classes, there were options like sorcerers and priests. For mental-based classes, there were unique and specialized options such as alchemists, clerics, or summoners. He recalled that before the regression, he had been somewhat of a player geek and had done extensive research on classes. In the pre-gression world, Sarah had chosen the Swordmaster class, which came with a unique ability, counter, paired with her lie-detecting skill. This allowed her to predict her opponent's actions with complete accuracy and land flawless counters. People even referred to it as cheating. Sarah then told him something important to keep in mind, that skills and classes had compatibility factors. She explained that if someone with magic-based skills chose a magic-based class, the synergy between them created enhanced effects that strengthened their power. However, if someone with magic-based skills chose a physical-based class, both their magic and physical abilities would end up average, making them a jack of all trades, but master of none. She added that although she didn't know exactly what his skill did, he should be careful. He thanked her, saying the information was helpful. He then realized that his skill, Lostman, was something he had never heard of before, even in his past life, and had no idea what kind of class options he would receive. Lulu Hart, who was floating nearby, appeared to understand the logic behind people having abilities after hearing Sarah's explanation. Sarah stood up and waved goodbye to him, saying she needed to go first for her class evaluation. Later in the same cafe, Sierra returned and thanked him for waiting. He asked if she had decided on her class. She replied that she had, and told him she had received about 4 options, including Swordmaster and Paladin. He was shocked, knowing that even having that many high-tier options at her level would normally label someone a genius. Sierra then excitedly shared that she had chosen the S-rank classmate. This shocked him even more, knowing that it was indeed an S-rank class that combined elegant magic with cold, calculated combat techniques. He recalled that before the regression, Sarah should have chosen the A-rank Swordmaster class. Yet now she was excited to stand shoulder to shoulder with brave people like him. He was stunned that she had called him a brave person and felt genuinely happy that she thought of him that way. She told him that it was now his turn, prompting him to stand up and head toward the class evaluation. He stopped in front of the globe, remembering that before the regression, he had never even gotten the chance to choose a class. He had no idea what kind of options would appear. Placing his hand on the globe, he watched as it began processing his class aptitude assessment. Suddenly, the system produced an error, startling him. He wondered if it was a malfunction, but then the system displayed that it had detected an unknown reaction within him and had begun redefining his class. This caught Lulu Hart's attention. When the system completed the assessment, he was shocked to see the result. His class was identified as Soul Eater, marked as rank X++. It wielded the power of the soul-devouring demon lord. The system explained that soul eaters could sometimes devour their enemies to absorb their strength, while at other times they commanded the subdued souls to dominate the battlefield. He was completely confused as this class had never even appeared as an option before. Then several class-specific skills unlocked before him: Soul Loss, Soul Trial, Soul Devour, and Soul Harvest. Overwhelmed, he shouted that he had never heard of any of this, not even before the regression, and frantically asked what it all meant. Lulu Hart grabbed his shoulder and shouted back that it was her ability. They examined his new class carefully, and Lulu Hart wondered aloud if the ghosts of the round system had judged her as part of the darkness. The system then proceeded to explain every class skill he had unlocked. A moment later, he returned to the cafe where Lulu Hart was waiting. She asked him if he had chosen a class, and he confirmed that he had, revealing that it was a class called Soul Eater. Lulu Hart responded that she had never heard of such a class before and appeared confused, noting that both of them had ended up with unprecedented, unique classes. Suddenly appearing beside him, Lulu Hart shouted that it was perfect timing. She ordered him to challenge Sierra to a mock battle, instructing him to fight using his power and test out his class. She added that they would talk afterward, which startled him. Minutes later, inside the indoor arena at the Japan Player Association's Shinjuku branch, he stood across from Sarah to begin their mock battle. He was surprised when he saw that she was wearing a maid outfit and asked why. She casually replied that it was because the outfit excited her. News had quickly spread, and players began gathering inside upon hearing that Sierra was about to fight. Her opponent was a rookie who had defeated Kay, the notorious beginner hunter. One of the staff members announced the start of the match and called for the battle to begin as the two faced each other. He reminded himself that Soul Eater was an unknown class, and this would be his first time testing it in actual combat. He activated his Soul Loss skill, which boosted his magic power, but simultaneously debuffed his stamina. He was shocked by the debuff. Before he could fully process what was happening, the system indicated that his Lostman skill had activated and had nullified the emotion of hatred. Lulu Hart then appeared above him, teasingly noting that she had forgotten to mention that her power was incredibly strong, but came with drawbacks. He quickly figured out that she had likely left that part out on purpose. Snapping him back to the moment, Sierra asked if he was finished testing his class. He assured her that he was ready. Sierra smiled briefly at his answer, but within a second, her expression grew serious. She warned that she was coming. He focused his gaze as she dashed forward. She was fast. The system displayed that Maid's work tools had been activated, a class skill that manifested exclusive tools used by maids. Various weapons appeared as part of the summoning. She threw several kitchen knives at him, which he managed to deflect. Despite this, Sierra continued closing the distance. She drew the sword at her waist and swung it at him. Fortunately, he blocked it with his own sword. He quickly realized that Sarah's lie detection ability also allowed her to see through combat feints, meaning he had no choice but to confront her head-on. Sarah questioned whether he really had time to think, then threw another knife at him. He bent backward just in time to dodge it. Immediately, he straightened his posture and looked toward her. She was already summoning additional weapons. Knowing she was preparing for another attack, he activated his Lost Man skill again, nullifying fear. She threw several more knives at once, but he blocked, dodged, and evaded them effortlessly as he dashed toward her. She was shocked and asked if what she was seeing was real. She was even more stunned when he appeared in front of her, with incredible speed, ready to swing his sword. Sierra managed to block the attack, but she felt the overwhelming force behind it. He then forcefully pushed her back, stunning the watching players around the arena. He felt magical power overflowing through his body, thanks to the effects of soul loss, and the sensation excited him. For the first time, he was truly experiencing the full potential of his class skill. On the other hand, Sarah landed on the floor with her foot and thought to herself that his straightforward fighting style was something else. Unlike Kay, it would have been easier if he had used feints. She was then shocked when she saw him charging toward her at high speed. She did her best to block every swing of his sword, noticing that his attacks surged like a tsunami. Despite having about as much player experience as she did, she wondered how he had become so skilled in combat. He jumped and swung his sword downward, knowing he needed to push through. However, he was caught off guard when he saw Sierra smiling. She then activated her maid's cooking technique and released a strong flame around her, which shocked him further. He attempted to extinguish the flames near him by stepping into them and questioned whether the maid class could even use fire magic. Sarah responded proudly that no one handled fire better than a maid and declared that she would cook him too. She then released even stronger flames around him. He sprinted away at speed, dodging the inferno while shouting in disbelief that it didn't make any sense. Sarah hurled even hotter flames at him and dashed forward with her sword, reminding him that a maid's job included cooking, and cooking meant fire. He covered his face to shield his head and swung his sword to counterattack, successfully deflecting her blade. Although he struggled against the searing heat, in that moment, he realized this was Sarah's true power. Power that would one day elevate her to strength. He thought to himself that if Sarah had a proper team, even Kay wouldn't have stood a chance. She summoned another barrage of knives and declared that she wasn't done yet. He remained silent and simply stared at her, impressed by the determination in her eyes. Despite everything, there was no sign she was giving up. She threw the knives at him and he tried his best to deflect them. However, one slipped through his defense and struck him in the arm. Suddenly, Sierra appeared in front of him and declared the battle over. Anticipating her move, he immediately controlled his mana internally and released it outward while swinging his sword upward. He activated his Lostman skill, nullifying the pain just before her kick landed. Because of it, he felt nothing and remained standing firmly, which shocked her. She couldn't believe it. Despite delivering a direct hit, he showed no reaction. He then swung his sword forward and she managed to block it. The system displayed that his health had dropped below 50%, meeting the activation condition for the soul loss skill. This triggered Abyss Soul, further increasing his magic power. He launched another strike at her, and Sar couldn't believe his magic output was rising even under such conditions. He continued his assault. She blocked once again with her daggers, but they began to crack under the sheer weight of his attacks. He pressed forward, swinging at her relentlessly, and she realized that she wouldn't be able to block them all. He noticed her beginning to struggle and recognized that the end was near. He positioned himself for the final blow and declared that it would be the finishing strike. Imbuing mana in his sword, he swung his sword at her, sending her flying across the arena and ending the match. The announcer declared him the winner. Sarah stood up calmly and acknowledged that she had expected that result from Yukari. She then extended her hand to him, admitting that it was a complete defeat for her. He shook her hand and responded that it was just luck, adding that if they fought again, she would likely win. She asked him seriously if he really meant it, to which he replied yes, telling her that he believed she would become the best player. But then he heard her make an unpleasant sound. Looking at her with confusion, he asked her why. Suddenly, she screamed in frustration, shocking him. She began shouting, demanding to know what that movement was and why he had jumped straight into a barrage of throwing knives. Trembling slightly, she asked if the screws in his head were completely loose. He could only laugh awkwardly in response. He realized then that Sierra was far more expressive than he had initially thought. She yelled that she had been so sure she'd win with that spinning kick, and her own inexperience was absolutely infuriating. Then she pointed at him, startling him, and swore that she wouldn't lose the next time. He was taken aback for a moment, but then smiled and told her that he would win again next time. The following day, in front of the E-rank dungeon known as Realm Gate, he asked Luluheart to confirm if this was the correct dungeon. She affirmed that it was and explained that it should be the perfect place to test the Soul Eater's abilities. She informed him that she had picked an easy dungeon so he could take it easy, and he agreed. He stepped forward confidently while Luluheart smiled, watching him enter the E-rank dungeon. Moments later, outside the dungeon, the guards were shocked and questioning what was happening. They reported to their captain that there was a sudden magic surge inside the dungeon. It had transformed into a red dungeon. They immediately rushed to call for backup from the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild and alerted the player association. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, Yukari was already busy cutting monsters in half, when another monster appeared behind him and swung its sword to kill him. He easily dodged the attack and moved away instantly. He then lifted his sword and swung it backward, severing the monster's head in a clean strike. Without stopping, he rushed forward and slashed through the monster in front of him as well. Minutes later, he was kneeling on the ground in exhaustion, asking Luluheart why the enemies were so strong if this was supposed to be an E-rank dungeon. Luluheart remained silent, not because she didn't know, but because she was surprised. Despite it being a red dungeon where monsters entered a berserk rampage and became several times stronger, Yukari had taken them down during his first encounter. Not only that, he had overpowered them without dying even once. She smirked, realizing that Yukari's growth was progressing much faster than she had anticipated. In that moment, she thought to herself that he was truly interesting. Luluheart laughed to herself, thinking that she would have to prepare even harsher training going forward, which immediately terrified him. The system then displayed that his class ability, Soul Eater, had auto-activated. He was surprised when he saw mana pouring from the defeated monsters' bodies and entering his own. He felt his body rapidly filling with energy. The system notified him that his mana capacity and status had increased. Luluheart explained that he had consumed the monster's souls, which were being converted into mana. She added that the more enemies he defeated, the stronger he would become. This was the first true essence of his ability. He acknowledged her insight and remarked that it was to be expected from the original owner of the class. Luluheart then proudly gathered the soul form of one of the monsters and told him this was the second true essence. She made the soul form float toward him. When he asked what it was, the soul entered his body. The system then initiated the draw for his class ability, Soul Harvest. After several seconds of evaluation, he acquired the Armor Knight Soul, a soul clad in sturdy armor with high resistance to physical attacks, which shocked him. Luluheart explained that a soul was the core of a monster, and that if he supplied it with mana, it could be materialized. He attempted to infuse mana into the soul, which successfully activated his soul command ability, allowing him to materialize the Armor Knight's soul. He summoned the knight and stared in amazement, shouting in excitement that it felt like a summoning spell. Luluheart quickly corrected him, warning not to compare it to mere summoning. It only resembled a puppet because his mana was currently insufficient. She stated that soul embodiment was an ability on par with the creation of life itself. Upon hearing this, he realized he had almost forgotten how powerful Luluheart truly was, given her tiny current form. He nodded at her proudly, which made her annoyed, prompting her to ask if he wanted her to crush him. Moments later, his summoned knight was engaged in combat with a monster knight. While they fought, he rushed behind the enemy, leaped into the air, and slashed it in half with a single swing. He then activated Soul Harvest and slowly extracted the soul form from its body, eventually acquiring it. He summoned it using Soul Command and successfully added it to his growing army. Lulu Hart remarked that he was starting to get the hang of it, but he replied that he could only summon the souls for a few minutes at his current level and needed to raise his rank and increase his mana capacity quickly. Lulu Hart smirked, noting that he was finally beginning to develop some ambition. Minutes later, in the dungeon's burning stage, he revealed the soul forms to Lulu Hart and reported that he had recovered 3 souls so far. She told him that it was not bad at all and gave him an approving smirk. Suddenly, a massive knight appeared at the center of the stage. Lulu Hart calmly noted that it was the only one left. Yukari confidently agreed and stared back at the towering figure, stating that this would be his first boss fight. Meanwhile, at the S-Rank 100 Flowers Blooming Guild, inside the Guildmaster's office, a lady secretary rushed in and called out to Sakurako. She informed her that she had received a report. Among the documents she carried was a file containing Yukari's information, immediately capturing the attention of Sakurako, the strongest player in Japan. The secretary reported to Sakurako that a mana overflow had occurred inside the E-Rank Ram Gate, resulting in the emergence of a red dungeon. Sakurako responded calmly, remarking that it was a nuisance. She then ordered the secretary to immediately dispatch B-rank players and have the 4th squad on standby, just in case. The secretary agreed without hesitation. Sakurako then asked if anyone had already entered the dungeon. The secretary replied that they had received a report of an E-rank player named Kaki Yukari entering alone. Upon hearing his name, Sakurako stopped walking. She thought the name sounded familiar, but then dismissed it, stating that in E-rank, nobody wasn't worth worrying about. She ordered her secretary to bring her the usual information. The secretary presented a list of everyone who had approached Sierra the previous day. Sakurako began speedily reviewing the documents, her mood shifting to irritation as she grew furious that unworthy people were getting close to Sarah. In her eyes, they were all equally worthless. She stopped abruptly when she came across a photo of Sarah and Yukari talking in the cafe. When she asked about the photo, the secretary calmly replied that it was taken during lunchtime. Sakurako pulled the photo from the pile and finally recognized Yukari as the one who had sparred with Sarah. She realized that she had overlooked him at the time, too focused on admiring Sierra's graceful fighting style. Her expression twisted with anger as she pointed at Yukari in the photo, thinking that another worthless insect was trying to latch into her Sierra. Meanwhile, in the E-Rank Dungeon's boss room, Yukari was on his 24th death in regression. Lulu Hart, floating lazily in the air, asked how much longer he planned to keep fighting, admitting that she was getting bored. He was locked in a battle with the boss when he shouted at her to be quiet, insisting the boss was far too strong. Lulu Hart simply smiled, knowing it was not a regular boss. It was a monster supercharged by the dungeon's mana overflow. An easy win was out of the question. Yukari reminded her that she had told him this dungeon was the perfect difficulty, but she teasingly responded by asking whether he didn't want to get stronger. She claimed that facing stronger enemies was exactly how one grew. He yelled that he was an idiot for trusting her, but just then the boss's sword came dangerously close to his head. He narrowly dodged the attack in time. He realized there was a huge rank gap. His attacks barely scratched the enemy, and one slip up could mean instant death. He managed to dodge another swing and deflected the next blow, telling himself that it wasn't as if his attacks were doing nothing at all. Suddenly, the boss dashed at him with incredible speed and launched a powerful fist toward him. Knowing he couldn't dodge, he activated Lost Man to nullify the pain. He blocked the boss's fist with his arm. Thanks to his skill, his health only dropped below 50%. He then activated Soul Loss and Abyss Soul, significantly increasing his mana. With a burst of strength, he pushed the boss's fist away and jumped back. He knew that Soul Loss drastically boosted mana as his health decreased. Though the activation conditions were strict, the resulting power surge was enormous. He stood his ground, telling himself that the real battle began now. Activating Soul Command, he manifested the Armor Knight Soul and ordered it to draw the boss's attention without attacking, focusing solely on defense. The summon followed his command and successfully distracted the boss. Knowing the knight couldn't inflict damage, he relied on its defensive role while moving into position. He reappeared behind the boss and slashed at it, drawing its attention. The boss turned to him. In response, he manifested another Armor Knight Soul and dodged the boss's sword. He ordered his summons to strike whenever the boss focused on him. Following the order, the souls slashed the boss from behind, distracting it again. He wiped the sweat from his brow, confident that he had seen all these patterns through his many regressions. As long as he stayed focused, he wouldn't be hit. He told Lulu Hart that giving orders while fighting had been tricky at first, but he was finally getting used to it. She simply smiled in response, noticing how well he coordinated without overestimating himself. She quietly observed that he truly shined the brightest when pushed to his limits. Elsewhere in the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild, Sakurako told her secretary that everything had worked out perfectly. When asked how, she explained that a red dungeon formed due to mana overflow, dramatically increasing its difficulty, something a beginner could never clear solo. She then tore the photo of Yukari in half, coldly, stating that by now he was probably nothing more than dust. She ripped the image into pieces and hugged Sierra's photo tightly, telling her secretary that she was sure they both agreed. Any worthless insect crawling near Sierra should die. The secretary agreed nervously, quietly backing away in fear. Sakurako then recalled the video of Yukari defeating Sierra and admitted that if by some miracle an E-rank beginner managed to clear a red dungeon, it would shake the entire ranking system to its core. It would be an unprecedented historical event, something not seen since the dawn of dungeon history. Meanwhile, inside the E-rank dungeon, Yukari activated Soul Loss again, boosting his mana and nullifying fear. He gathered mana into his foot and leaped toward the boss from behind. As his health decreased another 10% due to his skills debuff, his abyss soul entered a hyperactive state, dramatically increasing his mana. He brought his sword down with all his might in one decisive strike, landing a blow to the boss's head. Lulu Hart smirked proudly as she watched. With that, he successfully defeated the dungeon boss, the Knight of Flames, Homer, and claimed the Ring of Flames dropped upon its death. He also acquired Homer's soul. Hours later, in Sakurako's private room at the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild, she was stunned to hear that Yukari had cleared a red dungeon. Her secretary reported that it appeared Yukari had done it solo, which shocked her even more. Knowing that red dungeons featured drastically higher monster strength and overall difficulty, she found it unthinkable that a total novice could manage such a feat after just a few days as a player. The secretary added that Yukari was also the one who had taken down the wanted criminal. Sakurako recalled watching Yukari's mock battle with Sarah. His skills were clearly amateurish, yet he showed no fear of death, and his eyes were filled with madness. She smirked, thinking things were getting interesting. She then ordered the guild to dig up everything they could on Yukari, and declared that if he turned out to be the real deal, they would recruit him into their guild. She also announced that Shikamura Kazuki would hand over command of his C-rank squad to Yukari. This announcement shocked the secretary and another woman present, who both turned their attention to Kazuki. Kazuki couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked her to confirm if she had really said his squad. She coldly warned him not to make her repeat herself, stating she hated repeating things. Her tone startled and irritated Kazuki at the same time. She leaned closer to him and told him that if he was dissatisfied, he should prove that he was more capable than Yukari. She then turned and walked away, stating that she would entrust the full investigation of Yukari to him. Kazuki, furiously holding back his frustration, responded that he understood. Sakurako smirked and glanced back at him, thinking Kazuki was an easy man to manipulate. He couldn't even hide his killing intent, but she also thought that if Kazuki managed to kill Yukari, then that would be the extent of Yukari's potential. Regardless, she was looking forward to some interesting results. 1 week later, players gathered outside the Vine Gate, a D-rank dungeon. Sarah addressed the group, informing them that they would be tackling the dungeon that day, and that 3 members from the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild would be joining the raid. Shikamura Kazuki, a C-rank player with a gladiator class and a strength multiplier skill, introduced himself as the appointed leader of the party. He extended his hand to Yukari, who shook it, and introduced himself in return. Suzumura Ayaka, a C-rank player with a Sage class, a mana cost reduction skill, and a member of the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild, nodded in greeting. Kato, a D-rank player with a sorcerer class and a combo bonus skill, also nodded. He was affiliated with the Hayaka Ryorin Guild. Sarah proudly told everyone that Yukari had cleared the recent red dungeon entirely on his own. Yukari modestly responded that it was just luck. Sarah, however, told him that it was just like him to be modest and that he should be proud of his accomplishments. Senzaki Yumio, a C-rank player with an assassin class and the class genius skill from the Sakura Guild, interrupted to ask if he was the rumored rookie. Ishibashi Yuka, a D-rank player with an enchanter class and a wide area effect skill, nodded silently in greeting to the group. Yamamoto Taiyo, a D-rank player with a warrior class and a hardening skill, laughed and said that solo clearing a red dungeon was awesome. He admitted he was jealous, having been stuck at Dank for ages. Sarah responded that it was nonsense and praised Taiyo's top-tier tanking ability. The party continued their cheerful introductions, unaware that Kazuki was silently glaring at Yukari from the side. Later, the entire group was inside the vine gate of the D-rank dungeon, where they encountered a swarm of undead. As the battle unfolded, Sho shouted that there were far too many monsters, but Kazuki barked at them to stay in formation. In frustration, Umio yelled that this wasn't the time for textbook tactics. Meanwhile, Yuka was attacking with all her might at the side, thinking it would be a walk in the park, teaming up with the famous 100 Flowers Blooming Guild. She couldn't understand why they were struggling so much. One of the undead released a breath of decay, and Taiyo, positioned at the front, tried to maintain the formation, but the spreading poison was weakening their front line. He failed to notice an undead sneaking up behind him. Taiyo was shocked when he saw the undead's sword about to strike. Realizing it was too late to block the attack, he feared they were about to be wiped out. Fortunately, Yukari appeared just in time, slashing down the undead before it could land the fatal blow. He quickly helped Taiyo back to his feet and asked if he was all right. Taiyo, still stunned, stuttered that Yukari had saved him. But Yukari rushed off again, telling him he would draw the monsters from behind and for Taiyo to cover the front while he did so. Kazuki saw them acting independently and furiously reminded everyone that he had ordered them not to disobey his commands. Yukari ignored him, knowing that it wasn't the time for rigid hierarchy. He activated his lost man skill to nullify pain and called out to Lulu Hart, referring to her as Lulu for short, who was floating nearby, snacking on popcorn while watching the battle unfold. He asked her to pour her mana into him and draw the monster's attention. She agreed immediately, raised her hand, and infused him with mana, which successfully attracted the undead. Mid-cast, she realized what he had called her and shouted, demanding to know what was with the Lulu nickname. He ignored her and dashed toward the horde of undead, now rushing in his direction. He tilted his foot and leapt above the enemies. Lulu Hart shouted in frustration, offended that he would give her, of all people, a nickname. Again, he ignored her. Activating Soul Loss, he boosted his mana and nullified the emotion of hatred. He swung his sword backwards, then forward in a wide arc, striking multiple undead in front of him. Suddenly, an undead appeared from behind and released a breath of decay. He cursed under his breath, knowing that although the undead were slow, their poison was incredibly troublesome. The system then notified him that his desire to nullify the poison had been confirmed, triggering Lostman, which purged the poison from his body. Shocked, he felt the sickness vanish completely and theorized that status effects applied to him were recognized by the system as part of himself. With renewed energy, he spun his sword with greater force, realizing he could push even harder now. Compared to the monsters in the red dungeon, the undead were slow and lacked strong willpower. He continued swinging, cutting down the swarm almost entirely on his own. Umeko watched in disbelief and asked what was up with him, wondering if he was really just an E-rank. Taiyo watched with a smile, thinking to himself that this was the skill of someone who had cleared a red dungeon solo. Elsewhere, on the battlefield, Yukari infused a large amount of mana into his blade and swung it with full strength toward the last remaining undead. Cleanly severing its head, he declared that the fight was over. Everyone stood stunned at what they had just witnessed. He simply asked if everyone was okay. Umeo replied that okay was an understatement given that he had essentially defeated everything himself. He responded that it was only possible because everyone had his back. He then cheerfully approached Yumo, unaware that Kazuki was watching from the side, fuming. Kazuki silently raged, thinking Yukari was making him look like a fool. He remembered Sakurako's words, her command to prove he was more capable than Yukari. Clenching his fists, Kazuki swore to himself that he would show everyone he was the better player. Kazuki then approached Yukari in anger, reminding him that he had told them not to act on their own. Yukari calmly replied that if they had stayed in that formation, the rear guard would have collapsed. Kazuki shouted back that it had already been accounted for. He then glared at Yukari, wondering how he dared to go against orders, thinking that he was acting all high and mighty. Umio then shouted at Kazuki not to mess with her, saying the rear guard were the ones suffering the consequences. Kazuki snapped back, telling her not to blame him, and claiming that just because she was a famous model didn't mean she could act superior. This angered Umecho even more, and she shouted that her being a model had nothing to do with the current situation. Kazuki, now furious, reminded everyone that he had been appointed leader by Sakurako and demanded to know what was with their attitude. Umeo grew even more frustrated, but the other players remained silent. Kazuki biting his lips out of frustration while looking at Yukari. Yukari then suggested they should all calm down as they were still inside a dungeon and the situation remained dangerous. Sarah agreed and said they should begin by reassessing their formation. Kazuki calmed down upon hearing Sarah's words and agreed, which only irritated Umeo further. Lulu Hart, observing the exchange, remarked that humans were as awful as ever. But what was even worse was that Yukari had given her a nickname. Yukari looked at her and explained that shorter names were easier to call out during battle. He was confused to see her floating upside down in front of him, but she simply sighed and told him to do as he pleased on the condition that he properly collected the souls of the monsters in the dungeon. He nodded and confidently promised to leave it to him. A moment later, they walked deeper into the dungeon and came across two different doors. Kazuki glanced at Yukari, noticing that he kept acting like the leader, even though it was he who had been entrusted with command by Sakurako. Kazuki thought to himself that at the very least, he had to be the one to defeat the boss. With a smile, Kazuki suggested that they split into two groups, claiming that their exploration efficiency was too low. Umecho agreed, saying it sounded like a good idea, but Yukari disagreed and asked whether it wasn't too dangerous. Kazuki ignored the concern and announced that his team would consist of Ayaka, the buffer Yuka, and the tank Tayo. The others were surprised by the sudden division. Yukari leaned in and quietly asked Tayo if he was sure it was okay to split up. Tayo replied with a bright smile that Kazuki was the leader and assured him he would protect the other team, which only deepened Yukari's concern. Kazuki then called Sho over and whispered to him to join the other party and keep an eye on Yukari. Sho responded that he understood. Looking at Yukari, Sho wondered why Sakurako and Kazuki were so focused on someone who was essentially a nobody. Sho found the whole thing a pain and thought that he just wanted to go home. The group then split into Party A and Party B, each with 4 members. A moment later, Party B was in one of the dungeon rooms swinging their weapons. Yukari called out that enemies were also coming from the right and that he would draw their aggro while the others followed up with attacks. He activated Lostman to nullify the pain and dashed forward at high speed, telling Luluart he was counting on her. Though annoyed, she still poured her mana into him. A group of undead appeared in front of him, but he swiftly swung his sword and pushed them back. Sierra activated her maid's cooking ability and incinerated the knights in her path. Umeo unleashed her sonic blow skill to destroy enemies on her side and excitedly praised the front line's performance. Suddenly, an undead released a breath of decay near Yukari. He quickly activated Lost Man again, nullifying the poison and slashed the creature in half with one blow. Sho, who was positioned in the rear to protect them, couldn't believe what he was seeing. Yukari was undeniably strong. Sho also noticed that the monsters weren't even targeting Yukari, wondering if his aggro control was that perfect. Sho activated his Cold Bolt ability, launching sharp ice spikes that struck the monsters from behind. He observed how wide Yukari's field of vision was and how sharp his decision-making had become. He couldn't understand how Yukari remained so calm under pressure. While Sho supported from behind, Yukari landed the finishing blow on the last undead in his path and acquired the Skull Guardian's soul. He was relieved that a soul had finally dropped and noted that it came from the resurrected remains of a knight from ancient times. Its pupilless eyes still glimmered faintly with light. Umeko shouted excitedly that everything had gone so much smoother and praised his spot-on commands. She winked at him and teasingly said he was pretty good. Sho agreed, noting how smooth the entire battle had been. Sarah added that it was a well-coordinated team effort. Yukari felt a bit awkward and replied that it was all thanks to them, not wanting to admit that he had been fighting so eagerly just to gather monster souls. Sarah then suggested they take a break, mentioning that they had been fighting for over 2 hours. He agreed, but was quickly confused when Kazuki and Ayaka suddenly entered the room, both severely injured. Sarah asked them why they were alone, and Yukari questioned what they were doing in a place like that. Kazuki replied that they had returned to retrieve something they had forgotten, but it sounded suspicious. Yukari asked where the other two were. Kazuki looked away and said they had split up temporarily. Yukari didn't buy it. He glanced at Sarah silently, hoping she would use her skill to verify the truth. She shook her head, confirming that they were lying. He then asked Kazuki if he had left them behind. Kazuki replied no and insisted they were perfectly safe, But Sarah saw through him and shouted that Tayo and Yuka were in danger. Without hesitation, Yukari dashed past them, running with all his speed. He couldn't believe Kazuki was capable of something so reckless. As he sprinted through the corridor, he begged in his mind for Tayo and Yuka to be safe. Yukari then asked Luluart if she could tell where Tao and Yuka were. She replied that her magical power was too weak to pinpoint their exact location, but the directions should be ahead of them. He immediately sprinted forward, blaming himself for not being more cautious of Kazuki. As he ran, he encountered two undead blocking his path, but he didn't stop. With a single powerful swing, he cut them down while shouting for them to get out of his way. He obtained another Skull Guardian soul and continued running, desperately hoping that Tayo and Yuka were still safe. Meanwhile, in another room, Tayo was on one knee, laughing bitterly. He never expected to be left behind in the boss room. Just moments earlier, Kazuki had shouted that they could be useful and told them to be careful before fleeing with Ayaka. Kazuki escaped, yelling about how he would become an elite member of the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild, while Ayaka turned her gaze away and followed him, abandoning the two weaker players. Back in the present, Yuka lay severely injured on the floor and apologized to Tayo for being useless. Tayo, struggling to move, replied that he at least wanted to let her escape, but now he couldn't even lift his arm. The boss approached, raising its axe for another strike. Tayo asked himself if this was the end. He clutched a ring in his hand, whispering apologies to his daughters, Sayako and Aoi, for leaving first. Suddenly, the room shook with the impact of an attack, but Tayo felt nothing. He opened his eyes and was shocked to see Yukari standing in front of him, blocking the boss's axe. Yukari apologized for being late and told Tayo to leave the rest to him. Tayo called out for Yukari to be careful before collapsing. Seeing this, Yukari quickly moved to lure the boss away from Tayo and Yuka. Luluart urgently shouted for him to stay focused, noting that while the monsters in the dungeon had seemed weak at first, the boss had been absorbing magical energy from the dungeon and others. All the dungeon's magic was converging into it. Yukari acknowledged her warning and assured her that he wouldn't let his guard down. He then activated Soul Trial, boosting his mana significantly, but at the cost of receiving a confusion status effect. He countered this by activating Lost Man, which immediately nullified the confusion. The boss raised its weapon, and Yukari saw the attack coming. The axe came down at great speed, nearly slicing him in half, but he bent backward in time to dodge it. He quickly stood and launched a counterattack, swinging his sword at the boss. The boss blocked effortlessly. Yukari was stunned. It hadn't even flinched. He could feel the weight of the boss's axe and pushed it back using his mana. Spotting an opening, he swung at its side, but the attack barely left a mark. Before he could react, the boss retaliated, forcing him to catch up with its speed and block every blow. He was shocked. His direct hits were doing nothing. Yukari realized the difference in their stats was far too great. At this rate, he couldn't do any real damage. He enhanced his mana to level 2 using Soul Trial, receiving Fear level 2 in exchange. Once again, Lostman activated and erased the fear. He dashed toward the boss, swinging with stronger mana. Watching from above, Luluart noted how convenient Lostman was. The mental debuffs, the main drawback of Soul Trial, were completely nullified by Yukari's skill. He was literally losing the associated emotions to bypass the cost. Yukari kept attacking, driven by the desire for more mana. He activated Soul Trial again, raising his mana to level 3, which gave him Anxiety level 3. Lostman triggered and erased the anxiety. As he tried to land a clean blow, he finally managed to crack the boss's axe slightly. That small victory filled him with hope. He knew it was working. He pressed closer and launched more attacks, convinced that if he kept increasing his mana enhancement level, he could win. He activated Soul Trial again, raising his mana to level 4. This time he received Deadly Sinsloth level 4. Lostman once more erased the effect, but as he prepared to activate it again, he suddenly froze. A strange feeling ran through his body. The system issued a warning. His proof of humanity was rapidly decreasing. Dizziness overtook him. Luluart was horrified as she watched. The boss swung its axe down, hitting Yukari square in the abdomen and launching him into the wall. He slammed to the ground, unable to move. Luluart cried out his name in panic. She flew down to him and informed him that Lostman was a skill that consumed him. At that moment, he had lost too many of the elements that made him who he was, all just to negate the demerits of Soul Trial. He weakly asked what was wrong and why she looked so desperate. His vision blurred as she explained that if he continued down this path, He wouldn't just fail to overcome the soul trial. He would cease to exist entirely. Luluart realized her voice was no longer reaching him. She knew that if this continued, Yukari would be forced into undergoing the true soul trial. And if he ended up responding, the psychological damage would be irreparable. There was no other choice. Closing her eyes, she cast a magic circle. As it activated, the boss paused in shock at her appearance. She calmly told it to be grateful. It was a special event. With a fierce smile, she declared that she would personally take on its challenge. Then she looked back at Yukari and urged him to overcome the soul trial, at least for now. A moment later, Yukari fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In the dream, he saw the doctor who once told him he was skillless and couldn't enter dungeons. He saw the players who had bullied him, calling him useless. He heard his co-worker's voice reminding him that he was nothing. He saw the older Sierra worriedly advising him to just run away. Then he heard Kay calling him weak, the reason he had died. Yukari awoke, recognizing these as the worst of his memories. He then noticed his surroundings and wondered where he was. A copy of himself appeared from behind and replied that this was the soul trial. Shocked to see a duplicate of himself, he questioned whether he was hallucinating. He asked the copy if the soul trial was related to the soul leader ability. The copy confirmed it, stating that it was one of Demon Lord Luluhart's abilities. It explained that the true ability of the soul trial was to forcibly amplify one's desires, thereby increasing both soul and magical power. However, Yukari had been neglecting it too much due to the lost man's skill. Thus, he now had to confront it. The copy then grabbed him by the shirt, telling him almost creepily that he had to face the emotions he had lost and confront his own value. It accused him of being empty, shouting that he had nothing, that he would keep losing everything, and that he knew it deep down. It insisted that Yukari hadn't changed, couldn't change, and would never change. Meanwhile, back in the boss room, the monster swung its weapon and attempted to smash Luluhart to pieces. She narrowly avoided the strike by leaping away, but the force still slammed her against the wall. Struggling to her feet, she admitted to herself that she had anticipated this, but couldn't believe she didn't stand a chance, even against such a minor monster in her weakened state. It was beyond frustrating. She forced herself upright and glanced toward Yukari's soulless body. She couldn't afford to show weakness. This was all she could do for him now. As the boss raised its axe again, she slid under the swing and teasingly called out that she was the target. She was confident that Yukari would prove the value of his soul and overcome the soul trial. Back inside the true soul trial, Yukari asked his copy if proving one's value was really what it all came down to. Laughing as he spoke, he surprised his copy. He then admitted that maybe his life had been wrong all along, and maybe he would continue to lose everything. But even so, it was because of that life that he had met Luluhart, that frustrating result. The moment he could only run with her, the times he tried his best not to die just to save her, they were all a part of it. He gathered mana in his hand and declared that he may have nothing within him, and his life may be flawed, but his choices were not wrong. He thrust his hand into his copy, swearing that he would stop the dungeon break and save the world. His copy screamed in pain as Yukari poured mana into it, reactivating the lost man's skill. The copy dissolved into water and vanished. His proof of existence had dropped below a critical threshold, meaning he had regained his human presence. The soul trial space around him began to crack. The older version of Luluart appeared and remarked that he was riding a one-way ticket and called him Lostman. Yukari replied that he would accompany her. They were partners in fate. He reached out and took her hand. As their hands met, the system displayed that Luluhart's magical essence was being supplied to him. His lacking existence was reconstructed using her power, and his proof of existence was stabilized. In exchange, Luluhart's own proof of existence decreased. The entire soul trial space shattered, and Yukari was freed. Back in the boss room, Luluhart was still facing the monster. When it swung its axe at her again, someone blocked the blow. She smiled, saying she had kept him waiting long enough. Yukari had returned, pushing himself to block the boss's attack. He apologized for the delay and told her to leave the rest to him. She called him Lostman and asked if he had made his decision. As he slashed his sword at the boss, he replied that there was only one answer. She was confused by his response, but smiled and said she was curious. For now, though, they needed to deal with the boss. The monster, enraged, charged at them again, swinging its axe. Yukari dodged effortlessly, recognizing the repeated attack pattern. He furiously slashed at its side, asking if it really thought he would just keep taking those hits. The boss was stunned when his armor cracked. Yukari calmly informed Luluhart that his soul trial magic power had increased to level 5. Lulu Heart responded that the cost was great, but the effect was tremendous. Yukari simply agreed, then shouted that it was time for the counterattack. He then swung his sword at the boss with great force, but the boss blocked the attack. Yet he didn't stop. He continued swinging, pressing forward with relentless strikes while the boss struggled to block them. Spotting an opening, he successfully severed the boss's arm, making it scream in pain and grow even more enraged. The boss then dashed toward him at high speed, which shocked him. He immediately activated Lost Man, nullifying his fear. As the axe was about to hit his head, he bent backward just in time to avoid the blow. Turning swiftly, he channeled mana into his leg and kicked the boss, launching it backward. He smiled, grateful that he had taken that kick from Sierra during their mock battle. It had prepared him for this. Suddenly, the boss released a surge of powerful aura and raised its axe again, shocking him. It then summoned a mass of undead, revealing it still had a trump card. Lulu Heart, unbothered, teasingly called out to the undead, referring to them as small fries, while releasing her mana to attract their attention. He was surprised by her action, but she simply told him that the boss's mana was nearly depleted and that he should get ready. He nodded in acknowledgement. Raising his hand toward the boss, he declared that summoning wasn't its exclusive privilege. He activated Soul Command and summoned both the Armor Knight Soul and Skull Guardian Soul, commanding them to assist Lulu Heart in dealing with the undead while he charged at the boss. Their swords clashed in the center of the room as he attacked again. Lulu Heart stopped releasing her mana and told the undead that their time was up. One of them attempted to strike her, but she vanished. From the corner of his eye, he saw his summons battling the undead and realized that Lulu Heart had fought just as hard as he had. There was no way he could afford to lose. As their weapons clash again, the boss's axe cracks. Lulu Heart shouted for him to win, which gave him a surge of confidence. With one final push, he slashed through both the boss and its weapon, cutting it in half. A moment later, Sierra and the others arrived at the room. Sierra rushed to him, asking if he was all right. Lying on the ground, he weakly called out to them. Umeko and Sho couldn't believe what they were seeing and asked if he had really defeated the boss alone. Sierra, however, was only concerned about his battered condition. He asked her to help rescue Tayo and Yuka, saying they should have collapsed over in the corner. She nodded and told him to leave it to her, but before she could move, Kazuki interrupted, stating that it wouldn't be necessary and ordered everyone not to move. Ayaka suddenly grabbed Yuka and held a knife to her neck. Kazuki warned them that Yuka's life was now in his hands. Everyone was shocked. He demanded to know why Kazuki would do something like this. Kazuki, his mana surging, screamed that it was because of him. He shouted that if only Yukari weren't there, he wouldn't have been pushed this far, and that proving he was better than him would make everything better. Sarah tried to reason with him, telling him to stop the foolishness while there was still time. Kazuki replied that the time she spoke of had already passed. He had crossed the point of no return. He then asked if she knew the terrifying power of Sakurako, their guild master Aster. Sarah assured him that she would speak with her sister herself, but Kazuki scoffed and asked if she truly believed Sakurako would ever forgive failure. Sarah couldn't respond. She knew the truth. Kazuki then pointed at Yukari and challenged him to a one-on-one fight. Umeo shouted that Yukari wasn't in any condition to fight, but Yukari accepted the challenge. Sho approached, worried, telling him that it was insane in his state. Yukari thanked Sho for his concern, but stood up and said it had to be him. Kazuki, furious, charged at him, shouting that he would kill him. Yukari blocked his sword, but Kazuki, overwhelmed with anger, swung again and again, believing that if he could just defeat Yukari, Sakurako would acknowledge him. Though Yukari was barely standing, he continued to block each blow. Kazuki reminded himself that he was Kank and believed the gap in their stats was absolute, yet Yukari wouldn't go down. The system displayed that Yukari's health had dropped below 10%. Despite that, he smirked. His Abyss soul had entered hyperactivation mode, increasing his mana drastically and restoring everything he had lost. Recalling Kei, he told Kazuki that he had known someone even crueler and that he didn't fear death anymore. Raising his hand, he activated Soul Command, shocking Kazuki. Yukari then summoned the Skull Lich Lord, and to everyone's disbelief, the soul of the boss responded to the call. Kazuki stood stunned in fear and confusion as the spirit of the boss knelt before Yukari. No one could believe what they were witnessing. Kazuki demanded to know whether Yukari was a summoner or a necromancer. Even Ayaka stood frozen, gripped by fear. Yukari simply aimed his sword at Kazuki and declared that it was time to end it. The Skull-Lich Lord then swung its axe at Kazuki. Though Kazuki managed to block the attack, the force caused his sword to slip from his hands, and all he could do was curse loudly. He turned, seeing the Skull-Lich Lord looming behind him with immense power. Yukari commanded the Skull-Lich Lord to move closer, and Kazuki froze in fear and horror. The undead entity raised its axe and brought it down toward Kazuki, who lay helpless. Just seconds later, Kazuki was sprawled on the ground. Sho excitedly rushed over, asking what had just happened and confirming if that summon was really the boss of the dungeon. Umeo joined him, still unable to believe that someone with such combat strength was also capable of summoning a boss-class entity. Yukari replied that he wasn't a summoner, but he could do something similar. Sho then helped him to his feet. Taiyo, regaining consciousness, expressed his gratitude for being saved. Yuka added that Yukari was their savior, but he humbly replied that it was because they both had endured the boss's fierce attacks. As the group began walking out of the boss's chamber, Sira followed behind silently. She reflected on how, once again, Yukari had taken on an overwhelming burden. She wished he would take better care of himself. Yet knowing she lacked the strength to stand beside him, she felt she had no right to say anything. Watching him talk casually with Sho, she felt a strong determination rise within her. She must become stronger. Meanwhile, Luluheart watched Ayaka, who was now helping the collapsed Kazuki, and smirked knowingly. The next day, at the Japan Player Association's Shinjuku branch, an employee informed Yukari that all procedures for his promotion to Dank were now complete. He thanked her for her assistance, but the lady noted that he didn't seem very happy about it, which surprised and confused him. She went on to explain that reaching Dank was considered the first real hurdle for a player. It required both solo and team dungeon clears, and it entitled players to government subsidies and tuition exemptions. She remarked that he should be more excited. Yukari responded by asking if she believed a D-ranked player could clear an S-ranked dungeon. Puzzled by the question, she replied honestly that it would be impossible. He simply stated that that was the reason. He had to become stronger than even S-rank players. Luluheart, proudly floating beside him, nodded in agreement. The lady, understanding his ambition, acknowledged that for him, Dank was just a passing point. She wasn't sure whether he was joking or being serious, but then smiled, saying that if anyone could do it, maybe it really was him. She told him she looked forward to the day he stood at the top of the world. A moment later, as Yukari stepped outside the association building, someone called out to him. A man approached asking if he was Kaki Yukari. Confused, Yukari confirmed his identity. The man lit up with excitement and handed him a business card, identifying himself as Makoto Fuja, the recruitment manager for the Sakura Guild. Before Fuja could say more, another man rushed forward and shoved him aside, shouting that they had their eyes on Yukari first. Yet another man pushed them both away, yelling that the Konkai Guild Union had been first. Yukari, bewildered, asked why they even knew who he was. One of them replied that there was no way anyone wouldn't know about the rookie who had risen from F rank to Dank in a record-breaking 2 weeks. It finally dawned on him. Though he had experienced what felt like months of trials and deaths through regression, only 2 weeks had passed in the real world. Watching the recruitment managers argue fiercely over him, he told them he'd think about it. Then, taking advantage of the chaos, he sprinted away at lightning speed while the recruiters continued bickering over who would get to sign him. Later in Yukari's apartment, Luluheart told him that she thought he was going to join a guild, asking if she was right that humans like to gather in groups. He replied that he had considered it, then asked if he was also right in thinking he would grow stronger by learning from her, rather than joining a guild. She confidently agreed and cheerfully told him that he finally understood. She then informed him that they would soon challenge the Luluheart dungeon. Yukari immediately dropped his dumbbells and stared at her in fear. She looked back at him in confusion. He shouted at her, asking if she wasn't skipping way too many steps and if she had any idea how many S-ranked players had failed to clear that dungeon before. Luluheart calmly reminded him that the Luluheart dungeon was her home and assured him she had a special secret plan. She told him to leave it to her. Despite her confidence, Yukari couldn't shake the bad feeling growing in his chest. Meanwhile, in the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild, Sakurako sat silently while Kazuki knelt before her, desperately explaining that he had been set up by Yukari's despicable trap. Sakurako, however, informed him that the other players had all reported that he had made an insane decision. Kazuki swore in panic and insisted it was a false report, but then Sakurako reached out, grabbed him by the hair, and furiously asked if he was saying that Sierra was lying. Terrified, Kazuki shouted that it was true, claiming it was unfortunate, but Sarah was not in her right mind. Her anger intensified. Without another word, she activated her two-tail ability, Hakuman Konmu Kyobi, a skill derived from her nine-tailed fox power that summoned the essence of the white-faced, golden-furred fox. A flurry of butterflies emerged from her mana. Fox ears appeared atop her head, and two glowing tails extended from behind her. Sakurako looked down at Kazuki and told him she had already intended to punish him, even if he had managed to kill Yukari. But insulting her Sierra just to protect himself had sealed his fate. Anyone who insulted Sarah would die. Kazuki trembled, admitting in fear that he was wrong, and trying again to shift the blame onto Yukari, but Sakurako ignored his. She cast 1,000 colors and 10,000 blossoms, dual barrier, encasing Kazuki in a magical prison. As he screamed and begged for mercy, she remained silent. She then activated her convergence ability, directing it at the dual barrier, which shattered into pieces along with Kazuki, who was still crying and pleading for his life. When Kazuki disappeared like dust, Sakurako picked up a photo of Yukari, stared at it, and burned it to ash. With a cold expression, she thought to herself that it was time to see whether Yukari was the real deal. She had decided to confirm it personally. The next night, Yukari and Lulu Heart stood outside the entrance to the dungeon. She proudly remarked that her dungeon looked as amazing as always and asked if she was right. He agreed, telling her that it truly was in a class of its own. Staring up at it, he reminded himself that the Lulu Heart dungeon was the toughest in the world. Entering without permission from the player association was strictly prohibited, so he assumed getting inside would be a challenge. To his disbelief, just minutes later, he found the guard fast asleep. He whispered to Lulu Heart that they could probably just walk right in. She agreed, commenting that not many people dared challenge her dungeon anyway. The two of them walked through the dungeon gate without effort and soon stood at the portal entrance inside. Yukari whispered again, asking if they should go in. Lulu Heart nodded and they both entered, unaware that someone was watching them from a distance. Inside, Yukari was stunned to find himself facing a vast castle. It was the very dungeon players across the world had challenged without a single successful clear. He asked if it was just a corridor, and Lulu Heart replied that this was called the Infinite Corridor. She explained that the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon was a massive castle the size of an entire country. Without following the correct path, a person would wander endlessly, never reaching the boss room. She added that typically players would start in the forest outside the castle, but she had arranged a special shortcut for him. Yukari was relieved to hear that, admitting he was terrible at mazes. Lulu Heart proudly pulled out a stack of documents and told him that was exactly why she had prepared this for him. Surprised, he asked what they were. She replied that it was a handmade map of the labyrinth with the correct path already marked. He realized that was what she had been drawing the whole time. Amazed, he told her he couldn't believe she remembered such a detailed route. She responded with a smirk, saying that when one has lived somewhere for thousands of years, they just know. Yukari was surprised to hear that she had lived for thousands of years and began to wonder what she had been doing before the dungeon appeared. Lulu Heart pointed to a nearby wall and directed him to turn right at the dead end. They followed her instructions, another right, then straight ahead. As they walked, Yukari asked if there weren't any monsters in this dungeon. She replied that she was deliberately leading him through monster-free paths, adding that at his current level, he wouldn't stand a chance. Shocked, he asked if that meant he could reach the boss room without fighting. She told him no, he would have plenty of fighting to do soon enough. Exhausted just by the thought, he muttered that he knew it was coming. Eventually, they arrived at the end of the first floor path and peeked around the corner to see the monster guarding the area. Lulu Heart explained that Harble's body was extremely fragile, so he should be able to defeat her easily. Encouraged, Yukari immediately leapt out from hiding and charged toward Harble with his sword. But Lulu Heart called out that from his perspective, Harble was still very strong. Unfortunately, it was too late to retreat. Harble activated her wave of exhaustion ability, sending a blast of energy toward him. Yukari was stunned as the ability inflicted apathy, sapping his motivation and rendering him temporarily unable to move. His body froze in place. Panicking, he realized he couldn't move at all. Harble launched forward, her sharp claws slashing clean through his neck in one swift motion, killing him instantly. Yukari regressed 1 hour back. Trembling, he shouted at Lulu Heart that she could have mentioned that earlier. Calmly, she explained that she was in the middle of explaining when he ran off on his own. Defeated by her logic, Yukari admitted it was his fault and accepted responsibility. He shouted that Harble was insanely strong. Lulu Heart clarified that while Harble's body was fragile, she wielded powerful mental magic. He asked what that meant, and she explained that her magic inflicted level 7 apathy, equivalent to 7th tier magic. Finding someone who could resist it was nearly impossible, not just among humans, but even among monsters. He asked if it was really that impressive. She replied that someone able to use 3rd tier magic would already be called a genius. Even S-rank humans could usually manage up to 6th tier magic at best. He couldn't believe that Harble, who appeared so weak, was as powerful as an S-rank player. Lulu Hart simply responded that it didn't matter to someone with the lost man's skill. They peeked at Harble again, and Lulu Hart instructed him that all he needed to do was remove the emotion of sloth, which was the root of apathy's effect, and he'd be fine. Yukari finally understood what she meant. She then shouted that it was his chance, an opportunity to rapidly gain souls and mana while leveling up. Meanwhile, inside a church, Irugami knelt in prayer. Another nun entered and reported that a new player had entered the Lulu Art dungeon. Irugami stood solemnly, replying that to challenge such a sacred dungeon meant the person carried a sinful soul. Yoro Beatrice Irugami, ranked 1 in the Holy Dungeon Church, was the 6th strongest player in Japan. A Saintess class S-rank player with the Design Desire skill, she turned to her fellow nun and said that the challenger would most likely become an offering to the dungeon. But she added, if by some miracle he returned from that place, they must offer him their blessing. She asked if she was right, without Yukari knowing that yet another powerful force now had its eyes on him. Meanwhile, at the S-rank guild Sakura Dragon headquarters known as Oryu, Umio excitedly told someone that just when she was in trouble, Yukari had come to her rescue. The man she was speaking to smiled and responded that Yukari was a true man. Senzaki Kira, an S-rank player, ranked 15th in Japan with the Martial God class in Phoenix skill, and a member of the Sakura Dragon Guild, told Umechiko that he liked this cocky Yukari. But he added, if the 100 Flowers Blooming Guild was involved, it probably meant that the vixen Sakurako was too. Knowing Sakurako, whose pride was practically a wardrobe, meant Yukari might be heading into some dangerous encounters. Yumo asked her brother if there was anything he could do to help. Smiling, he patted her head and told her to leave it to him. He swore that he would train Yukari thoroughly after beating him to a pulp. Confused, she asked him to just protect Yukari normally, but Kira turned away, laughing as he walked off. She hurried after him, asking where Yukari was now. A moment later, his secretary whispered something into his ear. His expression changed to shock when he heard that Yukari had entered the Lulu Heart dungeon. Meanwhile, on the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon, Harble swung her claw at Yukari. He blocked the attack with his sword, but the impact was so powerful he staggered. Despite Harble's metal sealing magic being restricted, she was still immensely strong. Yukari activated his soul command ability and summoned the Armor Knight soul. He quickly coordinated with it, instructing it to attack from the opposite side. The summon obeyed and charged in from the other direction. Harble immediately turned and struck with her claw, instantly vanishing the summoned knight. But Yukari used the opportunity, appearing behind her with a smile and slashing her back. The strike landed cleanly, making Harble scream in pain. He quickly activated Soul Command again and summoned the Skull Guardian. He noticed that Harble's curious nature caused her to chase anything unfamiliar. But after the second trick, she began to grow cautious. She glanced back and forth between the Skull Guardian and Yukari, visibly calculating her next move. He ordered his summon to attack again from the side, catching her attention. With her focus scattered, she left herself wide open. Yukari moved behind her without being noticed. Harble sensed something and swung back at him, but he dodged swiftly and slashed his sword across her neck while shouting that she was too slow. The blow was fatal. Harble's head was severed and she collapsed. Yukari then activated Soul Devour, absorbing her soul and converting it into magic, which he successfully did. He was stunned by the incredible surge of magic power that flowed into his body. Lulu Hart explained that Harble was a monster from the highest difficulty dungeon, so the mana gain would obviously be immense. Excited, Yukari noted that he managed to acquire her soul on the first attempt. He decided to summon Harble's soul immediately and activated Soul Command. When Harble's soul appeared, she had a surprisingly cute smile, which startled him. Looking closer, he admitted that Harble was actually kind of cute. Reaching out to pet her, he was caught off guard when she suddenly bit his hand. He quickly pulled his hand back, stunned that her soul had bitten him. Lulu Hart explained that Harble's soul was currently overpowering for him. Even as a soul, Harble would naturally exhibit resistance. He asked if that meant souls had their own will. She reminded him that of course they did. Souls were at their core will itself. He nodded, realizing it made perfect sense. Lulu Hart then added that the stronger a monster's magic power, the stronger its will. In Harble's case, both her personality and appearance were directly reflected in her manifested soul. So if Yukari wanted to fully control monsters with strong wills, he would first have to grow stronger himself. A moment later, they arrived at a fountain along the path. Yukari drank the water from it, and his magic power was instantly restored. He turned to Lulu Hart and commented that the magic power recovery spring was a lifesaver. With his current mana reserves, using Harble's abilities would drain him completely. She agreed. Lulu Hart then informed him that the spring was placed there by the first floor boss, who loved fair fights. Yet for some reason, humans never used it. Yukari glanced at the side of the spring and noted that with such a suspicious sign saying it was a magic power recovery spring, most people would assume it was a trap. Still, he was glad for its existence. It allowed him to keep fighting. Lulu Hart told him that nullifying mental magic, retrieving Harble's soul, summoning her, and defeating the next monster was a special leveling up method that only he could achieve. After a few minutes of rest, Yukari summoned the Armor Knight soul and ordered it to stand still. Another Harble monster soon approached and was distracted by the knight. Yukari then ordered his Harble to use her wave of lethargy, a magic attack that inflicted lethargy, freezing the target's ability to use skills and rendering them completely incapacitated. His Harble cast the spell successfully, hitting the enemy Harble and leaving it immobile. Yukari dashed in alongside his own Harble and slashed the frozen enemy as Harble struck with her claw at the same time, instantly killing it. He harvested the soul immediately and thrilled high-fived the Armor Knight soul, cheering that he now had 2 Harble souls. However, Lulu Hart seemed dissatisfied. She criticized him for using one of his souls as a decoy and landing a sneak attack, asking whether he shouldn't be focusing more on improving his personal combat skills. He casually replied that decoy tactics were part of combat prowess too. As he tried to make a heart shape with Harble, she simply gave him a like, leaving Lulu Hart visibly frustrated. Suddenly, a golden key appeared in the air. He reached out and grabbed it, calling out to Lulu Hart that something had dropped. She saw the key and lit up with excitement, telling him that it finally dropped. He asked her what kind of key it was, and she eagerly replied that it was a treasure chest key. Yukari couldn't believe what he just heard, but Lulu Hart confirmed it with a gleam in her eye. She explained that dungeons and treasure chests go hand in hand, and now they could finally collect some world-class items. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the Sakura Dragon Guild, Kira was running at full speed, heading out. Knowing the nature of the Lulu Hart dungeon, where monsters beyond human comprehension resided, he understood just how insane it was to enter alone. As he raced forward, he couldn't help but wonder who exactly was Kanzaki Yukari. A moment later, inside the Lulu Hart dungeon, they arrived at the treasure room. Lulu Hart instructed him to open the screen in front of them. He carefully examined it for a moment before activating it. What appeared before him was a luxurious chamber gleaming with gold. He stared in awe, his body trembling as he approached a golden sword, overwhelmed by the number of powerful-looking weapons. Lulu Hart proudly agreed with his reaction, but quickly warned him that if anyone other than the rightful owner touched any of the weapons, a trap would activate. Horrified, he froze. His hand had been just an inch away from the golden sword. She continued, telling him that while her treasure vault was magnificent and she understood his excitement, their objective was something else. She then walked toward 2 treasure chests placed at the side of the room. Pointing to one, she told him she believed that was the one. However, she warned him sternly not to touch the treasure chest on the right. If he did, the mimic would awaken. He froze in place again. He nervously opened the chest she indicated and asked her if it was really okay. To his shock, the first item that emerged was the last elixir, an S-class rarity item that fully restored health and mana, cured all status ailments and diseases, and temporarily increased both maximum health and mana points. He couldn't believe what he was seeing and shouted, asking Lulu Hart if she was really sure he could take it and if she wasn't planning to come back later and demand it back. She simply asked him what kind of person he took her for. She urged him to continue. The next item was the Monodominial Ring, a world-class artifact, a rune-engraved ring that increased maximum mana capacity by 1.5 times. Then came the Infinitus Vault Pendulum, another world-class item, a magical storage device capable of storing up to 713,925 items. Next was Eterno Alma, an S-class artifact, a piece of equipment that prevented weapon durability from degrading. As long as it was equipped, any weapon would retain its form even after the most grueling battles. After that came the ring de lingua, a world-class ring that enabled communication across all human languages. It allowed the wearer to understand and speak any human language, though it didn't work on creatures without linguistic intelligence. Rare item after rare item poured out from the treasure chest, leaving him overwhelmed. Panic set in as he asked Lulu hard again if he was really allowed to take all of these treasures. She replied casually that she'd love to explore the other treasure vaults too, but no matter what, they'd eventually run into monsters. So it was better to avoid them for now. Hugging his precious haul tightly, he trembled in joy, admitting that he was more worried about whether it was really okay to take all the treasures. Just then, Lulu Heart mentioned that she had almost forgotten something. She turned and walked upstairs. Curious, he followed her until they stood before a display of weapons mounted on the wall. She turned to him and said there was one last thing she needed to do. Reaching for one of the weapons, he asked her what she was doing, but she only laughed and took a weapon off the wall. Smiling mysteriously, she told him he'd find out later. It was a surprise. Hours later, in one of the dungeon's hallways, they were facing a monster imbued with thunder powers. Yukari ordered his equipment, which had taken on a human form, to defend against the monster's attack. The equipment obeyed and cast an aqua-based spell to prepare for impact. The monster then released a powerful burst of thunderlight in their direction, but the water-based magic blocked it effectively. Yukari then summoned Harbel's soul. Harbel instantly used her skill on the monster, immobilizing it. Seeing the opportunity, Yukari rushed forward and cut the monster in half with a single swing. He immediately used his soul harvest ability and obtained the lightning element's soul. Before he could breathe, he sensed another monster approaching from behind. Exhausted, he turned around and shouted its presence. His equipment responded without hesitation. A flame monster released a searing wave of fire, but the equipment countered it with water magic, shielding Yukari from the flames. He dashed forward again and shouted to Harbel that it was time to move. She responded in agreement. The flame monster was caught off guard as they rushed it from both sides. Before it could react, Yukari and Harbel slashed it into 4 pieces. He then used Soul Harvest again and acquired the Flame Element's soul, an elemental entity of crimson fire that possessed overwhelming offensive power, capable of burning anything to ashes, and could also create a wall of fire as a defensive measure. Finally, Yukari collapsed to the floor in exhaustion. Relieved that they had won, Lulu Heart praised their teamwork, but he told her that he had lost count of how many times he had died. He pointed to the equipment beside him and said that without it, there was no way they would have survived. It was the last elixir, an S-class rarity item shaped like a pendulum and engraved with ancient runes. It allowed physical attacks to affect intangible beings and granted special attack bonuses against element-type enemies. Lulu Heart asked if it wasn't incredibly convenient and explained that normally physical attacks would have no effect on elemental-type monsters. Yukari asked if magic of the same attribute would be nullified, and she confirmed it, elaborating that with the last elixir, he could still land hits on elemental and spirit-type creatures. Yukari thought it would be great if he could use elemental spells too, but even casting a single one had completely drained his mana. Deciding to shift his focus, he told her he would collect as many souls as possible from now on. She questioned what he was talking about and reminded him that they were about to enter a boss fight, which terrified him. He yelled out in frustration, pointing out how hard things had already been just to get to this point. If that was the difficulty of the path, he was sure the boss would be impossible to beat. At the very least, they should level up before continuing, because without ranking up, he couldn't even unlock additional class abilities. Lulu Heart remained silent for a moment. Then she explained seriously that the demon lord who ruled the dungeon, the one they were trying to defeat, was on an entirely different level from any monster they had encountered so far. It possessed absurd strength, terrifying power, and a nightmare-inducing fighting style that could break a person with sheer impossibility. To defeat it, he needed real experience. Experience that couldn't be borrowed or faked. And while she couldn't fight in his place, she could at least prepare him for the battle. She reminded him that up until now, he had obtained more items than he could even carry and absorbed an incredible number of powerful souls. Then she admitted that this was the extent of what she could offer. The rest would be up to him. He was the one who had to save the world. Looking straight into his eyes, she tells him that it was he who needed to push back against the overwhelming absurdity threatening their world. It would have to be him who thought for himself, fought against impossible odds, overcame adversity, and seized victory because he had to become someone who could. Her words left him speechless. He responded with frustration that he had no reply worthy of them, then apologized. She told him there was no need. She had brought him here because she believed he could clear the first floor. Just then, the giant doors to the boss chamber began to open. Yukari stood before them with new determination. Lulu Heart gave him a push and shouted for him to pull himself together. He was going to save the world after all. He stepped forward into the boss room and declared his resolve to defeat the boss with his own strength. As he stood tall and faced the floating boss, he glanced at its peaceful, almost beautiful expression. Then he raised his sword, his heart steady, and with full resolve, he prepared to challenge it. No matter how many times he might die, he would save the world. The boss slowly descended from above, introducing herself as Serendiana, the one entrusted by the demon lord Lulu Heart to guard the first floor. She explained that any invader who dared disturb the peace of the demon lord would atone for their crime with their life. Calling upon the all-pervading source of light to pierce through the darkness in a single flash and become a radiant blade, she gathered the intense light into her staff and hurled a luminous ray in his direction. The beam of light shot toward him at incredible speed, shocking him, and before he could even react, the attack struck him and killed him instantly. Moments later, he regressed 1 hour prior and reappeared in front of the boss room. Unable to believe he had died in an instant, he wondered if the light Serendiana had thrown was a form of magical light. Lulu Heart, appearing behind him, teased him and asked if he already needed her help, but he replied that he was fine. He realized that although the beam's speed was incredible, its trajectory had been a straight line, making it possible to predict. He concluded that if he kept his eyes on her staff's direction, he might be able to dodge it, activating his soul abilities to boost his magic power. He stepped toward the boss room, deciding to initiate the soul trial first. Once inside, Serendiana once again began gathering light into her staff and aimed it at him. He focused his gaze on her staff, and when she released the luminous ray, he immediately jumped to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. It was a close call, but he was relieved that he had managed to dodge it. Serendiana appeared surprised that he had evaded the attack on his first attempt and acknowledged that he had truly earned his way there. She then added that perhaps it was time she got a little serious, which caught him off guard. Calling upon the void-born flame, she summoned fire to scorch the earth without light and bring forth judgment that incinerated all creation. The crimson flame gathered in her staff as she activated her dance inferno skill, forming a massive magic circle. She then launched Empress Explosion in his direction. He saw the fire surging toward him and realized there was no way to dodge it. Serendiana appeared surprised that he hadn't attempted to escape, but he vowed to himself that he would burn the experience into his memory. The explosion engulfed him, and his body was blown to pieces. Once again, he died and regressed. Now understanding that fire magic was typically a wide-area attack, he took note that its activation time was roughly 3 seconds. Swearing to himself that he would make it next time, he stepped back into the fight with renewed determination. After dodging the luminous ray again, Serendiana prepared to strike with Empress Explosiona. As the flames rushed toward him, he immediately activated his soul command and summoned the fire element's soul. The summon created a protective wall of flames that blocked the incoming attack and shielded him from the explosion. Serendiana, observing that he had survived, calmly noted that it was an interesting tactic. She recognized that the fire element he had summoned was born as a natural elemental and therefore possessed the innate ability to nullify magic of the same attribute. She acknowledged that he had used this property to cut through her magic. While she explained he was barely staying upright, his body strained and mana nearly depleted. A light then emerged from Serendiana's forehead as she pointed out that he had full control over the surrounding magical energy. But his mana reserves were clearly exhausted, rendering him no match for her. Flames burst out around her as she told him he should have used his summon more efficiently. He knew the fire would consume him, but he still managed to express gratitude for her advice. Moments later, he was burned alive and died once more. He knew that at the moment, he didn't have enough mana to keep summoning high-rank elementals, so his timing had to be precise. For just an instant, he had perfectly read Serendiana's attack pattern and summoned the elemental only at the precise moment when the spell was unleashed. He reminded himself that until he could reach Serendiana, he had to keep hitting that perfect timing. He then died 3 more times before realizing that he still couldn't catch up to Serendiana. though he told himself that he only needed a little more time to analyze her. When she released a powerful wind spell, he was killed again. After dying 4 more times, he began to notice that Serendiana's spell selection speed was even slower than summoning an elemental. He then pushed himself to avoid her lightning spells, knowing that he had to predict the next element and summon the correct elemental in response. Otherwise, he would have no chance of winning. 6 more deaths followed before he attempted summoning Harble, only to realize her mental magic had no effect either. He was killed repeatedly after that, especially when Serendiana attacked with dark magic. He ran for his life while noticing that her long-range spells had homing properties, and no elemental could block them. Accepting his fate, he died again and again. Eventually, he realized that whenever Serendiana fixed her gaze on him, it signaled a guaranteed water-type spell. He trembled from the cold as he was encased in ice and died a few more times. Serendiana then launched another flame explosion, mocking him as a pitiful, helpless lamb, desperately trying to prolong his fleeting life. Despite his repeated deaths, he kept trying to get closer to her. Thoughts of giving up started to creep in, but when he saw Lulu Hart's gaze filled with belief in him, he found renewed strength. He rushed toward the stairs, dodging another blast of flame, and shouted in defiance that there was no way he couldn't do it. Though he died again, he managed to inch closer to her, which took Serendiana by surprise. Unfortunately, he perished before reaching her completely. Once again, Serendiana hurled a flame explosion at him and silently observed whether he had survived. Fortunately, he did. He stood proudly at the top of the stairs and declared that he had finally made it that far, right to her feet, and had at last reached her. Serendiana calmly sighed before questioning whether he truly believed that was the extent of her power. She mocked him as truly pitiful. He was stunned when she released a radiant light around her. She asked if he realized that what lay ahead was nothing but sheer despair. She then cast the forbidden magic, 9-fold silent chant, releasing 5 different elemental powers around her simultaneously. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. She was casting 5 elements at once. With her staff pointed directly at him, she unleashed all the spells together, intent on reducing his fragile life to dust. Meanwhile, Kira and Yumko were sprinting down the street. Umeko asked Kira if the Lulu Heart dungeon was really that dangerous, but Kira simply asked her if she remembered the large-scale raid incident at Lulu Heart dungeon. She replied yes and asked if she was right in thinking he had participated in it. She mentioned she had been working as a model back then, so she didn't know the details, but recalled that it was the one where the raid had failed. He responded that it wasn't just a failure, it was a total disaster. He then told her that there had been 6 S ranks and 12 A ranks involved, including both domestic and foreign players, but they were all annihilated. She was stunned to hear that and asked how the raid could have failed with 6 S-rank players. He calmly explained that S-rank dungeons were special. Each one was like an entire world of its own. Specifically, the Lulu Heart dungeon begins in an elven forest where cunning elves and S-rank monsters continuously appear, and the entire forest is a labyrinth. He added that when both their physical and mental limits had been pushed to the edge, a massive castle appeared before them. By that point, their party had been reduced to 1/3 of its original size. She asked him why he didn't retreat, and he simply replied that Sakurako was still inside. She nodded in understanding. He continued, saying that the strongest among them was still standing, and that alone had kept the remaining players going. But by the time they reached the boss room, only 4 remained. Himself, Sakurako, Kagamin Kyoiro, ranked 12th among Shranks, and Jumoku Kaika, the 19 off-ranked S-rank and first guildmaster of the Hayaka Senran Guild. Umio shouted that it sounded like Japan's All-Stars and asked how it was even possible to lose with that lineup. He replied that for a while they had thought it was an even fight, but only because Serendiana hadn't gotten serious yet. She had used quintuple chanting and had concealed her 9-fold silent chant, which allowed her to control all 5 elements simultaneously. At the same time in the Lulu Heart dungeon, after Serendiana unleashed the 5-element magic on him, he was instantly killed. When he revived, he realized that even if he could summon entities capable of wielding one of the 5 elements each, it wouldn't change anything. At best, he could summon 2 at once, but doing so would instantly drain his mana. Lulu Heart called to him from behind to check on him, but he simply replied that he was fine and they should keep going. He then activated his Lost Man skill, which removed the sensations of panic and anxiety. Lulu Heart, watching from behind, understood something. Moments later, Serendiana hurled fire magic at him. He used his fire element soul as a shield and move forward. He noticed he could barely withstand the element, and when she struck again with a different magic, he was killed instantly. He kept trying to approach her, only to be killed repeatedly. Yet he believed there had to be a way to break through. After many attempts and deaths, he felt his consciousness begin to fade. He knew his mana would be exhausted before he could even reach her, meaning he had to be more efficient. But then she cast a water spell that caused him to panic, only for the spell to fly past him. He was shocked. He hadn't expected her to miss. Unfortunately, when he looked ahead, another water spell hit him. He realized too late that it had been a double attack and died. He grew frustrated, unable to break through her 5-element magic. After being killed multiple times, doubt consumed him. He asked himself what he was supposed to do, how he was supposed to win. All he saw was the death panel again and again. Kneeling, he couldn't see a path forward. Clenching his teeth in frustration, he thought that even though Lulu Heart believed in him, he still couldn't win. In a desperate moment, he chose to use the method Lulu Heart had warned him not to. He activated Lost Man again, this time removing not only panic and anxiety, but also fear and paranoia all at once. As expected, without any unnecessary emotion, his thoughts became sharper. He told himself there had to be a reason Lulu Heart brought him there. She always acted for his sake. He pushed himself to think. There had to be something he was missing. Why had Lulu Heart made him face such an overwhelming opponent? And why now? Wouldn't it have made more sense to grow stronger first, to train, to gather items or collect souls? He told himself it couldn't be that simple. There had to be more. He admitted that he was weak. And in that moment, an idea snapped into place. All the fighting he had done flashed before his eyes, and he realized something. Lulu Heart made him fight because he was weak. He thanked her silently for it. Lulu Heart, winking, just asked what he was talking about. He opened the boss room for what felt like the 100th time and stepped inside, telling Lulu Heart that he finally understood. He now knew the way to defeat Serendiana. Lulu Heart told him to show her the answer he had found through his struggles and suffering. A few minutes later, Serendiana remarked that it was certainly an interesting strategy, as it relied on something every element possessed from the moment of their birth, the ability to neutralize magic of the same attribute. As flames circled around him, he managed to avoid the fire spell she hurled thanks to his fire element soul. She admitted she hadn't expected him to use it to endure her magic, but he simply smirked and asked if she would now take him more seriously. This surprised her. Then he suggested she use a spell with 5 attributes at once, shocking her even more. She asked how he knew about it, but when he didn't respond, she said she had no need to entertain such cheap provocations. Still, she added, it was the duty of the strong. He saw her begin to chant and was proven right when a massive magic circle appeared behind her. She told him she would bury him in a single strike, just as he had requested. He stood there for several seconds, then vanished. This startled Serendiana. She wondered whether it was perception obstruction or concealment magic. But she knew her mana detection couldn't be deceived by such simple tricks. She looked around, confident she should be able to detect his presence, no matter how weak his mana was. Calming herself, she reminded herself that no living thing in that world lacked mana. All she had to do was annihilate everything in the area. She unleashed her 5-element magic in a wide area attack. Minutes later, as the magic began to dissolve into the air, she still hadn't sensed him and grew angry at her inability to locate him. Suddenly, she heard the sound of footsteps sprinting and cast magic around her instinctively, still wondering how he had disappeared. What she didn't realize was that he was directly above her, perfectly positioned. He had figured out that Serendiana perceived the world entirely through mana. When he used Lost Man, which eliminated his mana signature, she could no longer perceive him. He raised his sword, knowing that once Lost Man expired, his mana would return. As the system displayed that the skill had ended and his mana was restored, he leapt down and activated his ultimate ability, Soul Absorption, Full Power, Soul Burst. Serendiana turned in shock, unable to believe the magnitude of the mana now emanating from him. She wondered where he could have gotten such overwhelming power. A few hours earlier, he had told Lulu Heart that, as expected of the most difficult dungeon, the number of souls he had obtained was incredible. He explained that soul absorption, which increased his stats and mana upon delivering the final blow, had been extremely useful. But Lulu Heart reminded him that that was only the beginning. He looked at her in confusion. She then explained that if the soul leader class truly descended from her, the true power of soul absorption lay in the storage. Soul absorption allowed Yukari to store the souls of defeated enemies, functioning like a reservoir. Just like a dam, it could release the stored energy all at once. His final attack was powered by every soul he had ever absorbed and every life lost in regression. It was a strike containing everything he had. He knew it was an enormous risk, as it would use up all his collected souls. But he shouted at Serendiana, demanding to know how many times she thought he had died. He had observed her spells. He knew the length of her chance, and at this distance his strike would land no matter what. Serendiana remained calm, acknowledging that he was a splendid human. But she reminded herself that he wasn't the only one with a trump card. She knew that a magician's greatest weakness was chanting time. Did he really think she hadn't overcome that? She extended her hand into the air and opened her treasure vault, searching for a wand she had stocked, one that allowed casting without chant time. But she was stunned to find it missing. Panic set in. Had her vault been breached? Looking up, she knew she wouldn't make it in time. Yukari gave everything into his final attack, shouting that it would end there as he swung his sword down upon her. She raised a barrier in desperation, but she already knew it wouldn't hold. As expected, the barrier shattered within a second, and his final blow landed, triggering a powerful explosion. At the same time, the system broadcast a global announcement to all players. The first floor of the Rank 1 Lulu Heart Dungeon has been cleared. Sakurako was infuriated. The system then showed the identity of the player who cleared it and stated that this player had been rewarded with control authority over the first floor, as well as authorization to enter the second floor. The system congratulated all players and wished for the health and blessings of everyone in the world. Meanwhile, inside the Lulu Heart Dungeon, Yukari and Lulu Heart celebrated in joy. The first floor of the Lulu Heart Dungeon lit up, and a statue of Serendiana appeared at the center of the altar as the living Serendiana vanished. Yukari screamed in disbelief that he had actually won, but soon after he felt dizzy and fell to his knees. Laughing, he told Lulu Heart that he was completely out of it. It had cost him far more soul energy and mana than he could handle. The system then displayed a message confirming the dungeon's conqueror, showing Yukari at rank 1 on the contribution ranking. That's when he realized the system had assumed the dungeon would be tackled by a team. The system then awarded him the Rinton, a world-class great item known as the Ring of Rotating Magic. It explained that the Rinton nullifies all magic, but after use, it enters a 24-hour cooldown. Immediately after, his Soul Devour skill activated, consuming the soul of Serendai Diana Rinswheel, also known as Serendiana, and converting it into mana. He was shocked when he felt a flood of souls pouring into him, but it made sense given the enormous scale of mana involved. Even though it was overwhelming, he understood what it meant. Once Serendiana's soul was fully devoured, the system began processing his contribution level. However, it encountered an error, informing him that his contribution would be stored until he reached S rank, as contribution ranking updates were not possible for non-rank players. Surprisingly, he was relieved. Even if someone asked how he cleared it, he couldn't exactly admit he had borrowed the Demon Lord's power. Luluart then praised him for a job well done, telling him that she hadn't expected him to actually defeat the floor boss of her dungeon. She also informed him that he was the first to do so. He was surprised that she was honestly praising him and thanked her, adding that it was only possible because of her. She asked if she was right in thinking he brought her along because of his low mana. He didn't answer directly and instead told her that he had always wondered why she had sent him to the Lulu Heart Dungeon, despite him only being dank. But during his fight with Serendiana, he realized something. Every time he was near death, her accuracy dropped. That's when he figured out it was because when his mana ran out, Serendiana couldn't perceive his presence. He explained that at first he had thought Serendiana was just a beautiful woman with sleepy eyes. But the truth was, she really couldn't see. If he had been stronger with more mana, he might never have realized that Serendiana observed the world through mana. He would have fought her head and over again, never understanding why he kept failing. He guessed that the real reason he was sent into that dungeon was because of his low mana, a trait that ironically turned out to be his greatest advantage. Luluart didn't bother responding with pleasantries. Then Yukari asked if he was right that she had also recovered Serendiana's staff back then. He thought to himself that while he had managed to defeat both Harble and Serendiana somehow, he hadn't truly conquered the dungeon. And he hadn't stopped the ninefold silent chant either. He told himself that he had to get stronger. And when Lulu Heart saw his expression, she sighed and told him he was probably overthinking again. She then reassured him that he was the one who defeated Serendiana. But he asked if he was right in thinking that discovering Serendiana's weakness was thanks to the lost man's skill. She simply asked him why he was trying to separate it from himself, reminding him that the lost man's skill was his because he chose it. She went on to explain that Serendiana's hidden ability was called Elder Vision, which allowed her to perfectly perceive her enemy's mana and predict their actions. The higher her opponent's mana, the stronger she became, bordering on clairvoyance. However, because of that overwhelming perception, Serendiana had neglected to develop any other detection methods. Yukari had played his cards well, exploiting both her weakness and her arrogance. In the end, it was nothing more, nothing less. He looked at her, surprised by the explanation, and thanked her warmly for it. He then asked why his soul harvest ability hadn't activated when he delivered the final blow. She pointed ahead and told him that Serendiana's soul was sealed within the statue. When he looked, he told her there was nothing there. She explained that Serendiana's mana output was so massive, even among floor guardians, that he likely couldn't sense it in his current state. But if he kept improving, soul summoning would eventually become possible. Still, he responded that he couldn't even imagine summoning Serendiana. It had been far too intense. Lulu Heart then suggested that they come back another day. Even though he had absorbed Serendiana's mana and grown stronger, it had only increased his mana capacity, not replenished it. If he didn't take a break, he would remain completely drained. She then informed him about uncharted areas to explore, soul recovery tasks, and treasure collection opportunities, adding that there was still a lot left to do just on the first floor. He agreed with her and said he was already exhausted. They should just go home and take it easy. A moment later, they exited the Lulu Heart dungeon and Lulu Heart disappeared, saying she would update the supplemental map. Yukari stepped out of the dungeon, feeling like his joints were breaking apart. All he wanted was to go home and sleep, but suddenly a knife was pressed against his back. A woman's voice warned him that it was dangerous to walk alone on a moonlit night like this. She then activated her skill, Design Desire, and told her pet that it was time for its meal. Yukari turned his head slightly as he felt a powerful presence behind him and saw a monstrous eye. Before he could react, the monster attacked, sending him to the ground, coughing blood. Dark magic energy wrapped around him, trapping him in place. As pain overwhelmed him, he wondered what had just happened and activated Lost Man to dull the sensation. Then approached him and remarked that the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon had been cleared today, and the only person nearby was him, so she'd like to ask a few questions. Seeing the knife in her hand and the massive monster beside her, he stammered out a question, asking who she was. With a warm smile, she introduced herself and told him to call her sister, Yoro. He struggled to stand and managed to move a little. She was impressed he could still move at all. Then she ordered her pet to attack again. However, it doesn't affect him. She was shocked to see that her Design Desire had been erased and wondered how a D rank with no mana had done it. What she didn't know was that the Rinton, the boss drop from Serendiana, was still in Yukari's pocket. It had activated, nullifying the magic and saving his life. But Yukari knew it couldn't be used again for another 24 hours. And being restrained meant he couldn't access any other items. Panic set in. He had no mana, no strength left, and no idea what to do. Irigami then confirmed her suspicion. He was dangerous and said she would now use a little of her true strength. Activating Design Desire again, she ordered her pet to tear off his limbs. The monster lunged with its claws while Irigami coldly said they would make him permanently disabled. But just before the claws reached him, someone appeared, shielding him in time. Sakura greeted Irigami, calling her trash while holding the monster's claw tightly. Sakura then turned to her and asked he was doing to Yukari. He couldn't believe his eyes. Sakura was standing before him. He wondered why Japan's top player had appeared there of all places. Sakura turned to Irigami, calling her a witch, and said she had heard someone had cleared the Lulu Heart dungeon, so she came to take a look. She hadn't expected to run into her there. Irigami responded with a warm smile, saying it was cruel for Sakura to call her a witch, and that she should instead call her sister Yoro with a bit more affection. Sakura glared at her. She knew exactly who Irigami was, the holder of the Holy Attribute's strongest saintess class, a so-called witch who in truth governed the mysterious Holy Dungeon Church. Sakura accused her of always being good at hiding her tail, making it so no one would ever guess she was in Japan. But today must be her lucky day, she said, because she finally had the chance to erase her. Irigami, however, smiled sweetly and told Sakura not to bear her hostility so openly. She claimed that she merely revered the dungeons, the monsters, and the one who ruled them all, the Demon King. Irigami added with excitement that it was simply an act of faith. That angered Sakura even more. She told Irigami she didn't care what she believed in, but messing with her guild had been a mistake. Just feigned confusion and replied that she had no idea what Sakura might be referring to. Her only target, she claimed, was Yukari. Uragami then explained that today the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon had been cleared, and Yukari was the key individual responsible. Sakura froze for a second, then asked incredulously if Irugami meant Yukari had cleared the Lulu Heart dungeon's first floor, but then she burst out laughing and told to say it again. With a smirk, Sakura told her she'd make an exception and let her repeat herself since it had been ages since she'd laughed that hard. And honestly, Yami was quite amusing. Ayami chuckled too and asked if perhaps she had a hidden talent for making people smile. As the two women exchanged laughs and banter, Yukari sat silently watching them with a mix of fear and confusion. Sakura's tone then shifted. She smiled coldly and acknowledged that Yukari had defeated Kei and even subdued Kazuki, who was more than 2 ranks above him. But she also knew that the Lulu Heart dungeon wasn't something one could just conquer so easily. Turning back to Irugami, Sakura stated that as expected, entertaining a witch's delusions was a waste of time. She declared that she would kill Irugami right there and then. Sakura activated her 5-tail skill and launched her Foxfire Half-Blood ability at Irugami. Calmly, Irugami activated her Albion Veil to defend herself. When the Foxfire struck, it triggered a massive explosion of energy around them, but not a single scratch appeared on Irugami. Irugami turned to Sakura and said she expected her to have that much firepower, even without using her full strength. Then she asked if it was really the time to be holding back. Monster launched its claws at Sakura, but Sakura only smirked. She released a magical shield to block the attack, and coldly told Irugami not to get cocky if that was all the power she had. Irugami then ordered her pet to activate corrosion. Its claws spread corrosion, allowing it to pierce through Sakura's barrier and shatter it completely. However, this only excited Sakura further. She unleashed her Black Flame Butterfly Half-Blood ability in retaliation. As the floating butterflies landed on the monster's claw, they ignited into powerful black flames, burning the creature to death. Meanwhile, Lulu Heart appeared beside Yukari, telling him that those women possessed an extraordinary amount of magic power. Since he was out of mana and stamina and unable to move, she advised him to simply watch for now, because what he was witnessing was the wall he would one day have to overcome. He nodded in response, understanding fully. It was a battle between S-class entities, and he planned to burn every detail into his memory. Urugami then released her sacred spears, holy lances of light summoned from the sacred castle. Their divine energy was particularly effective against evildoers and mortal beings. She aimed them all at Sakura and launched them simultaneously, saying that people were too obsessed with preserving what they deemed normal. Sakura activated her double barrier ability, blocking the spears trying to pierce her. But Iyami wasn't done. She cast an even stronger magic circle and spoke again, proclaiming that Earth had been chosen as the land of God and that humans should gratefully accept skills, classes, and dungeons as miracles. She hurled more sacred spears, provoking Sakura further. Visibly irritated, Sakura shouted back that Irigami's delusions were all over the place and activated her 1,000 bind chains half-bloom ability. She declared that she couldn't care less about Irigami's ridiculous beliefs. Her chains wrapped tightly around the incoming spears, and when she gave the order, they constricted and shattered the spears into fragments. Urugami responded by releasing even more powerful magic. Realizing her previous level wouldn't be enough, she deployed her holy sword, a radiant blade imbued with divine energy, particularly effective against evil and beings that exist between realms. Without hesitation, she swung down the sword at Sakura. Sakura binds it mid-air, wrapping the sword tightly. Urugami teased her, asking if she truly believed her 5 tails could restrain such a holy weapon. Sakura acknowledged it as a cheap provocation, but said she would play along just for a bit. She promised to show Irugami the vast difference between their powers. With that, Sakura released her 6 tails and activated Ritual Foxcry Barrier, Demon Heaven Curse, a technique that filled the area around the battlefield with the curse of the demon fox, rendering any target within its range immobile. A claw from the demon fox emerged from the rift in space. Urugami was stunned and asked if Sakura really intended to summon the demon fox itself. Was she planning to blow away all of Shinjuku? Sakura coldly replied that if it meant erasing Irugami, then sacrificing a city or two was a small price to pay. Yukari was horrified to hear that Sakura was willing to destroy an entire city. He noticed the serious expression on her face and knew he had to act. That's when he saw one of Sakura's bind holding a holy spear, now aimed directly at him. Rugami, meanwhile, released another holy sword and aimed it at Sakura, shouting that the pure and vicious power of magic made her heart race. She declared they should surrender fully to their skill's power and drown in it. She then hurled the holy swords at Sakura. Just then, the system notified Yukari that his health had dropped below 10%, triggering the activation of his abyss soul. It elevated him into an ultra-high state, dramatically increasing his magic output. Reacting immediately, he summoned Horrible Soul, and it binds Irugami hands, stopping the attack in time. Sakura was stunned. She couldn't believe he had managed to restrict Irugami's movements. Even though he was just a D rank, Yukari pushed himself to his feet. He didn't know how much more he could do in that condition, but he knew that right now he was the only one who could act. He swore to stop the fight no matter what it took. Meanwhile, Lulu Heart was watching from behind, amazed that Yukari had thought to stab himself with the Holy Spear to forcibly reduce his health and recover magical power. However, she also recognized that it presented a significant problem. Irugami then laughed loudly and claimed she had received a revelation. She exclaimed with excitement that Yukari was her destiny and activated her luminous sanctum ability, which removed all status ailments, freeing her from Harble's bindings. Yukari was shocked to see Harble's status effects instantly lifted. Without hesitation, Irugami hurled a holy sword at him, shouting that her plans had changed and she would now be taking Yukari for herself. This enraged Sakurako, who unleashed her seven-tail skill, shouting at Irugami not to underestimate her. Sakurako caught the holy sword with one hand and released magic with the other, shouting to Yukari that if he got in her way, she'd kill him first. She then cast Heavenly Thunder Butterfly above him. Yukari was shocked by its speed and knew he couldn't defend himself. He had no mana left. The butterfly exploded upon landing on him, causing a thick fog to spread through the area. From within the fog, a voice called out. It had made it just in time. Kira, who had blocked Sakurako's attack, shouted to both women that enough was enough. They couldn't afford to destroy Shinjuku. Kira told them that if they insisted on continuing the fight, they would give him no choice. Sakurako, calm but defiant, asked if he really thought he could defeat her. Kira replied that he probably couldn't beat her, but he wouldn't lose either. That left Sakurako visibly frustrated, but speechless. Suddenly, Sarah appeared, calling out to her big sister. Sakurako was shocked to see her little sister there. Sarah shouted that Yukari was her benefactor and pleaded for a chance to treat him. Sakurako calmed down, glancing toward Kira. She remarked that she couldn't believe they had brought Sarah with them. Kira explained that they had detected a massive magic reaction on the way and immediately called Sarah, knowing that nothing gets resolved when talking to Sakurako unless Sarah is present. He was also glad that Umeko and Sarah were close friends. Kira then turned to Irugami and asked what she intended to do. Irugami composed herself, realizing that facing two Shranks would be too troublesome at the moment. She approached Yukari and declared that it would be a waste to kill him now. She then activated her Illuminous Ray Shift, enveloping herself in light. Just before disappearing, she looked at Yukari and told him again that he was her destiny and that they would meet again. When the situation calmed down, Sakurako approached Yukari and said there was something she needed to confirm. She asked if he was the one who had cleared the Lulu Heart dungeon. Yukari looked at Lulu Heart and asked her opinion, whether he should tell them about the regression, thinking they might become allies. But Lulu Heart replied that she couldn't recommend it as dungeon breaks weren't always caused by the Demon King alone. Yukari was confused and asked what she meant. Lulu Heart explained that originally monsters couldn't leave dungeons. To do so required a great sacrifice or special means. Yet, a dungeon break of this scale had occurred. That could only mean that someone on humanity's side was cooperating with the dungeon break. This left Yukari even more confused. Lulu Heart advised him to be cautious and to avoid standing out for a while. Sakurako was about to ask again when Yukari cut her off. He told her no, that he was just a D rank who had overestimated his own ability. He clearly stated that he was not the one who cleared the Luluart dungeon. This shocked Sierra, who could see through lies. Yukari knew he had lied in front of Sierra, but he couldn't think of any better reason to hide the truth, even if the situation seemed suspicious. Sakurako turned to Sarah and asked if Yukari was telling the truth. Sarah paused for a moment, then eventually nodded. She said Yukari was telling the truth. It wasn't him who cleared the dungeon. Sakurako nodded and accepted the answer, saying that for Sierra's sake, she would let it go. Umeo then introduced Kira as her older brother. Kira said that somehow they had made it through the chaos and offered to let Yukari stay at their place for the night. Yukari thanked them, admitting it would be a big help. Sakurako turned to Sarah and asked if they should go home together. Sarah agreed, but inside she knew the truth. Yukari was the one who had cleared the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon. Sarah felt a pain of sadness, realizing he was always one step ahead of her. But more than that, she was confused about why he had chosen to hide the truth. Was there some secret he couldn't yet share? Sarah convinced herself that Yukari wasn't the kind of person to lie without reason. It must mean she wasn't yet someone he could confide in. Resolving herself, she silently vowed to train harder, to become someone Yukari could trust and lean on. That was all there was to it. Meanwhile, in the Holy Dungeon Association, a sister approached Irigami and asked if she was unharmed and what they should do about Yukari. She told that with her order, they could eliminate him immediately. However, replied that it wouldn't be necessary. She had sensed it. Harble, the entity Yukari summoned, carried the unmistakable magical signature of the Lulu Heart dungeon. That was enough to confirm it. Irigami smiled and told the sister that Yukari was their light, their hope for dungeons to overtake the world. She then whispered her thanks to her lord, utterly confident that Yukari was the one destined to be her partner. 3 days after clearing the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon, at the Japan Dungeon Association, Tokyo branch, a female staff member was looking at her tablet and noticed that the news about the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon being cleared was everywhere. She couldn't believe a player had actually managed to clear that dungeon. She also noted that a popular online theory claimed Sakurako was the one who cleared it, but she didn't think it was Sakurako. Just then, Yukari approached and politely excused himself, asking if he could request a rank-up procedure. The woman immediately apologized, saying she hadn't noticed him while distracted. He replied it was no problem and informed her that he'd like to confirm his promotion to Kank. The lady was surprised and reminded him that it had only been a week since his D-rank promotion. She explained that to be promoted to C rank, one typically needed to clear over 100 dungeons. Yukari understood her reaction. It was common knowledge that while the rank-up mechanism wasn't fully understood, it was believed that defeating monsters and clearing dungeons accumulated contribution points. He glanced at the massive, global-like stone in the room, knowing that touching it would automatically determine whether a player was eligible to rank up. The player association managed the system. He assured the lady that it was all right. He had cleared the necessary dungeons. In truth, he had exceeded the standard contribution requirement. Upon clearing the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon, he had been granted the title of C-rank player. His mana circuits had increased to 8. His stats and mana quality had risen, and he had unlocked a new class ability, Soul Resonance. He knew that now as a C-rank, his mana circuits had doubled, and he could summon souls more reliably, no longer just for an instant. Yet Lulu Heart reminded him that this alone wasn't enough. She explained that mana circuits converted the world's overflowing mana into skills and class abilities, but the absorption rate depended greatly on the strength of the user's soul desire. Even with increased circuits without a strong soul, the enhancement was incomplete. She added that the reason he grew stronger under pressure was precisely because of that, making him realize why she had pushed him so hard. Yukari replied that he'd thought pushing him to his limits was just her hobby, but when she stayed silent, he curiously asked why she had suddenly gone quiet. A moment later, the lady allowed him to touch the stone. It confirmed his eligibility and granted him the official title of Kank player. She was shocked. It had actually happened. She had previously assumed that defeating Kayakazuki was some kind of fluke, but to rank up from D to C in just 1 week, that was a speed rivaling even Sakurako. She wondered what kind of dungeon he must have cleared. She briefly considered the Lulu Heart dungeon, but quickly shook her head, telling herself that was impossible. Shortly afterward, Umecho congratulated him and he thanked her. She excitedly remarked that she couldn't believe he had already caught up to her in rank. She added that her brother seemed impressed by his performance the previous night, then asked if he'd consider joining the Sakura Dragon Guild. Umecho said she believed they would offer him a good position. After all, Kira was the guild master acer. But Yukari replied that he was thinking of going solo for a while. He still considered himself inexperienced. Ume nodded and said she wouldn't force him, but added warmly that he'd always be welcome. Later in the National Player University East Building cafeteria, Yukari was eating when he asked Lulu Heart via telepathy if it was really okay for them to be attending university so soon after such a major incident. Lulu Heart replied that the soul would wear out if he just kept pushing it, and that moderate rest, what people call daily life, was important. Yet he responded that he felt guilty relaxing when he knew a dungeon break was bound to happen in the future. She firmly told him that guilt, impatience, and anxiety were also important emotions. Realizing there was no use trying to argue when she was like this, he gave up. Still, having skipped university classes ever since returning to the past, he felt awkward. He knew that today was technically his first day of university, and back in that period, he had hardly made any friends. Suddenly, a voice asked if it was all right to sit with him. When he looked up, he saw the pretty Sierra who smiled at him. He told her she could sit wherever she liked. She took the seat next to him, which made him feel awkward. He wondered why she had chosen to sit beside him. He guessed that Sierra was still worried about the lie he told before and quietly thanked her for covering for him. He glanced at Lulu Heart, wondering if he should properly explain the Lulu Heart dungeon situation to Sierra without realizing that Sarah had already activated her Eye of Truth skill. She saw a green aura around him, the color of guilt. Smiling, she told him that she didn't know his circumstances, but she wouldn't doubt him, and if he ever had something he wanted to talk about, he could rely on her. He was touched by her words. Then she mentioned that she had heard he transferred to the player education department after being promoted to C rank. He confirmed that was right and explained that it was apparently quite rare for a first-year university student to reach C rank since players could only become active after turning 18. Aside from special cases like Sierra, most aim to rank up from FTO over the course of a year. Sierra, hearing that, thought to herself that she had finally caught up to him a little. But in reality, she had been left behind again. She figured she was probably nowhere near him. Her thoughts were interrupted when Yukari told her that he'd heard she had also ranked up to Dank and congratulated her. He was confident that she wouldn't just reach D rank, but would climb all the way to S rank. He assured her that she would surpass him in no time. Sarah silently confirmed that he wasn't lying. She wondered why Yukari believed so strongly in her and what kind of expectations he had for her because she had been curious for a while. Thanks to his words, her confidence was boosted once again. She swore to herself that she would live up to those expectations. She then asked if he had decided on his class and told him that she was in class 1. One next to him, Lulu Heart was yawning with exhaustion. He replied that he believed he was assigned to class 113. Sierra was visibly startled. He noticed her reaction and asked if there was a problem. She replied that it was nothing, but her expression clearly said otherwise. With no other option, she explained that Class 13 was formed based on ability, regardless of year, which meant it had a few, just a tiny bit unique individuals. He was confused by her words, but told her there was a dungeon clearing class orientation later with greetings from classmates. He said he was looking forward to it. Later, in front of the C-rank dungeon, Gusion, he was kneeling on the grass with a sign that read, "Today's baggage carrier." A female player was shouting at him, demanding to know what was going on and why a first-year small fry was mixed in. That woman was Iba Kamori, a C-rank player with the Berserker class and unknown skills. Suji Naruse, another C-rank player with the Knight class, casually replied to Kari saying, "How should I know?" and guessed that Yukari was probably just there to carry bags. Nearby, Utoto Kagariawa, a C-rank elementalist with unknown skills, yawned silently. Komori then turned back to Yukari and shouted at him not to dare get in front of her. She warned him that she'd kill him if he got in her way. He awkwardly laughed and responded that he would do his best to learn from his seniors. Looking at his 3 powerful classmates, he realized that this dungeon raid was going to be extremely troublesome. Naruse then announced that their job today was to carry the gear and collect materials, clearly stating not to join the fight and to save experience points. Yukari happily agreed. However, Lulu Heart wasn't having it. She questioned why she had to work with them and urged him to go to the dungeon by himself. He knew that to enter a C rank or higher dungeon, he needed to go with a party. Also, if he wanted to raise his player rank, he didn't have a choice. Before the reset, he had been desperate to be involved with dungeons and used to work part-time collecting materials near them. Right now, he couldn't publicly say he had cleared the Lulu Heart dungeon. And without any known achievements, he was in a strange position. No wonder his seniors were wary of him. Lulu Heart then asked if he remembered the conditions. Yukari listed the items not to bring, no swords or any gear other than the permitted ones, and no soul summoning. Lulu Heart praised him for remembering and told him he would be fighting the monster with his bare hands today, reminding him to focus his magic into his fists. Since he had been practicing martial arts over the past few days, He decided to demonstrate what he had picked up inside the Seiyang dungeon. Guju and Kumori wondered why not a single monster was around. Yoto then asked whether, if they cleared the dungeon, they would get the credit. Kumori agreed and explained that the university only wanted high-ranking players with real achievements. Suddenly, Yoto spotted something in the distance, a two-golem monster. Without hesitation, Kumori sprang into action and tried to chop down the golem, but it only left a small scratch. Naruse, not wanting to fall behind, joined the attack. Yoto followed up with an aqua spear spell, but the attack had no effect. Seeing an opening, Naruse attempted to slash the golem. Meanwhile, Yukari observed the battle. He noted there were two frontline fighters and one backline magic user, but their teamwork was a mess, like solo players thrown together. Their individual skills were high, so their teamwork just barely held. He was tempted to fight two and collect the golem's soul, but he had been told to carry gear, and stealing experience would be considered bad manners. Back on the battlefield, Kumori delivered a heavy blow to the golem. Immediately, Yoda followed up with electric magic. Kumori then leaped into the air and finished the job with her rampage crush, destroying the golem into pieces. Without wasting time, she ran toward the next golem. Yukari expected his seniors wouldn't need any help. At that rate, they'd finish the next one in 10 minutes. However, they failed to notice a golem hiding in the corner. Realizing his seniors hadn't seen it and were starting to look worn out, he decided to try it himself. Without hesitation, he dashed toward the golem, channeling magic into his fist and punching it directly in the face. He realized it didn't go down in one hit, but his control over his magic now rivaled using a sword. Deciding to try again, he delivered a second blow that shattered the golem's head into pieces. Realizing the result, he decided to try again later, when another opportunity arose. Just then, Kumori ran up and asked if he was okay, but what she saw shocked her, a golem reduced to pieces. Yukari tried to explain, but her attention had already shifted to the golem materials, and she assumed the monsters had fought over territory. Just as he thought he was safe, Yukari was scolded for wandering off on his own. She ordered him to return, and he quickly complied. Kumori then looked at the broken remains of the golem. Deep down, she knew what she was seeing. Yukari had destroyed the golem with his bare hands. She realized it shouldn't have been possible for someone with a C-class status or even an A-class power. Realizing something didn't add up, she decided to keep an eye on Yukari. As they ventured deeper into the dungeon, they encountered another golem. Naruse blocked the attack using his iron barrier skill. He then signaled to Yuto, who quickly trapped the golem's foot using Ice Fort. Kumori leapt in for the kill, slashing the golem in half with Beast Fang Flash. Just when it seemed over, another golem charged from the side, but Naruse intervened using Justice Taunt. The skill provoked the target, forcing it to attack him and increasing his defense upon activation. Uto followed up with an Ice Spear attack while telling the others to coordinate. Both quickly agreed. Kumori then activated her Blood Mist combo, a skill that drains health and increases attack speed while performing a rapid combo. Naruse used Brave Strike, a powerful downward slash with a chance to knock back the enemy. Kumori finished the job with another Beast Fang Flash, destroying the golem. Seeing this, Yukari praised their firepower. Kumori explained that they had exploited the golem's weak point, increasing their critical hit rate. Curious, Yukari asked what she meant. She explained that her Berserker class multiplied damage several times. In simple terms, the critical rate increased each time certain conditions were met, such as attacking vital points or striking an incapacitated enemy. In exchange, her style only allowed for heavy attacks that left her wide open. This was why Naruse, acting as the knight, managed the enemy's attention, while Uto, as the elementalist, provided support and secondary damage. Once they had analyzed the weak points and created an opening, Kumori delivered the finishing blow. Yukari thought that the golem fight would be difficult for his seniors, but he realized they had developed their own rhythm through experience. He had been worrying for nothing. Naruse then inspected the golem's remains and commented that the monsters were tough but not numerous. However, it took too much magical power to defeat even one. He proposed retreating or taking a break. Yu disagreed, pointing out that the dungeon didn't have many enemies and they didn't have time to spare. Yukari, confused, asked what he meant. Naruse explained that they were already in their third year and it was scouting season. Right now they were only C rank, but if they didn't reach at least B rank, they wouldn't be able to join a good guild. Yu added that even if they managed to get in, they'd only be treated as bottom-rung members. This surprised Yukari. From his perspective, just being able to make a living as a player was amazing. Even Sakurako, who was from the same university, had already reached S rank by the time she graduated. Naruse wasn't surprised, having heard rumors that she had cleared the Lulu Heart dungeon. Yukari was shocked and asked for clarification. Naruse explained that it was just a rumor, but when it came to clearing that dungeon, he couldn't think of anyone else. Yukari realized that this was what the public believed, and he didn't want to stand out until he solved the mystery of the dungeon break. In that sense, this misunderstanding worked in his favor. Suddenly, Yuto became serious. He warned Yukari not to interfere in their battles and reminded him that he was only there to observe, not to do anything unnecessary. Yukari was surprised, but agreed. Later, as they walked, Yukari reflected on how he had been soloing monsters for a while. He decided he'd learn by observing how his seniors fought. Though he badly wanted to collect golem souls, he was excited to see a different side of the monsters. Suddenly, he felt an ominous presence. He quickly turned around and shouted for everyone to run, but it was already too late. They were surrounded by golems. His seniors were shocked. They couldn't believe they were surrounded. Yukari had suspected something was wrong. There had been suspiciously few monsters. He now wondered if it was a trap designed to lure them deeper. If so, there might be an intelligent monster behind it. Kumori, realizing that monsters were coming from all directions, decided they had no choice but to push forward. Yukari realized his seniors weren't suited for fighting multiple opponents and told them to leave it to him. He would hold the golems off. This confused Naruse, who shouted that they couldn't possibly win against that many and that they were retreating. Suddenly, a golem launched an attack between them. As Naruse struggled to stand up, Yuto ran past him, declaring that they were leaving Yukari behind. Naruse was stunned and asked if they were really abandoning him. Uto cold his eyes, stated that Yukari was just a newcomer who had barely made C rank, and if he could buy them some time, that was enough. As Yukari dodged the monster's attack, he urged the others to go. He told them he was good at running away. Kumori asked if he could really handle it. Yukari assured her to leave it to him. Kumori saw it as a good opportunity to gauge his ability. She ran off, telling him she'd leave it in his hands. Naruse, with no other choice, turned and followed her. As Yukari assessed the situation, he counted around 30 golems. He realized that if he left his backpack on the ground, it would be crushed. So he tossed it into the air and called out to Luluart, asking her to infuse him with magic while he drew the golem's attention. Luluart agreed and remarked that he was as soft-hearted as ever, but Yukari disagreed, saying his body had gone dull from just watching. Then, with a determined expression, he declared that now was the time to collect souls. Several days earlier in the Holy Dungeon Church, Kumori was praying when someone suddenly approached her. It was Irugami, and she greeted her. Kumori was glad to see her. Urugami explained that the reason she had called Kumori was to request a favor. Kumori, as unhinged as ever, told Irugami to command her however she wished. She would fulfill the task, even at the cost of her life. Hearing this, Irugami was pleased. She asked if Kumori still attended the university. Kumori confirmed that she did. Leaning closer, Urugami told her that she wanted her to get close to Yukari. Kumori's expression turned serious as she asked if this was a new elimination target, but Irugami clarified that it wasn't. She explained that Yukari was an important piece in achieving their long-term wish. However, as a vessel, he was still immature with a fragile soul. Therefore, he needed to be honed. With a crazed smile, she instructed Kumori to push Yukari to his limit, strip away all the unnecessary parts, and sublimate him into something perfect. Kumori, confused, asked how she was supposed to do that. Irugami calmly replied that she just needed to drive Yukari to the brink of death. There was no need to hold back, and if Yukari died, then that would simply be the extent of his potential. Back in the present, Yukari was being charged by golems. He dodged an incoming attack, turned quickly, and countered by smashing the golem's head. He was glad he had managed to destroy it with a single hit. However, 2 more golems charged at him. Fortunately, he jumped just in time, and the golems collided, crushing each other. He then powered up his fist and destroyed the head of the first golem. Without wasting a second, he took down another. Leaping through the air toward the next one, he crushed its head with a single stomp. He was now literally punching down every single golem. Luluart, watching from a distance, was amazed by Yukari's growth. Even for a C-ranked dungeon, a golem's defense surpassed that of some B-ranked monsters. She wondered if his rapid growth was fueled by the regret of being helpless in the previous timeline. His dedication to becoming stronger was truly remarkable. At this rate, she considered they might be able to move on to learning tier magic in the next dungeon. After defeating all the golems, Yukari collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. Luluart praised him, noting that taking down a total of 32 golems was impressive. Yukari admitted that it had gone well in the beginning, but in the latter half, his stamina couldn't keep up, and he had needed multiple hits to finish them off. Lulu Hart agreed, pointing out that his magic had wavered midway, and he was putting unnecessary strain on his body. Yukari acknowledged that he understood her point. He explained that with the item he had acquired from the vault, his physical abilities had suddenly increased and he wasn't yet accustomed to them. The item in question was an S-rank Grand Strength Ring, which increased the wearer's physical strength and power. The second item was the S-rank Harden Ring, which increased defense and reduced physical damage. The third was the S-rank Windblaze Bangle, which increased speed and quick evasion, as well as enhancing consecutive attacks. Yukari still vividly remembered the battle between Irugami and Sakurako. He was painfully aware that he was far below their current level. Determined, he resolved that he needed to catch up. Otherwise, stopping the dungeon break would remain a pipe dream. He stood up and decided to rejoin his seniors. While running, he hoped they were safe. Lulu Hart informed him that she didn't sense any magical power nearby, so they were likely safe as long as they hadn't entered the boss room. Elsewhere, Naruse told his companions that he was going back. Uto asked him if he was sane, pointing out that doing so wouldn't erase the fact that he had abandoned Yukari. Naruse, visibly frustrated, admitted he agreed. He confessed that he was already irredeemable scum for leaving his junior behind, but at the very least he wanted to retrieve Yukari's body. Kumori disagreed. She told them they were heading to the boss room, which confused both Naruse and Yuto. She explained that if they defeated the boss, the dungeon would collapse, and if by some miracle Yukari had survived, they could save him. But if they went back and faced dozens of golems, there was nothing they could do. They were better off defeating one powerful boss. That was how they could prove their worth. In truth, Kumori remembered Irigami's order to push Yukari to the brink of death. Helping him would be inconvenient. Utio agreed with her, telling Naruse that what they needed was results, not sentiment. Dwelling on the dead wouldn't help them. Naruse replied that he understood. As the two walked, he felt a growing sense of cowardice, realizing it was fear that had made him abandon Yukari. He was overwhelmed with guilt. Even so, he told himself that if he could defeat the boss, he could at least bring back Yukari's body. Suddenly, Yukari arrived and asked if they had been waiting for him. He was glad he had caught up. The two were shocked, but Kumori eyed him with suspicion. Naruse was shocked to see that Yukari was still alive. He had assumed Yukari would be dead, but Yukari simply told them that he was good at running and had survived by sheer luck. Not wanting to stand out, he kept quiet about defeating the golems. He also didn't want to believe that one of his seniors might be the traitor responsible for triggering the dungeon break. Still, he knew it was better to stay cautious. Naruse apologized and admitted that he had panicked. Yukari assured him it was fine, adding that he was the one who had given them the idea in the first place. Yu then approached him, warning him not to turn into one of those thieves who run around collecting experience points. He called Yukari a brat who had just gotten lucky. Yukari responded that if all he wanted was experience points, he wouldn't have bothered to fight at all. Meanwhile, Kumori silently watched Yukari. She wondered whether he had really escaped from the golem herd and if he belonged to a stealth class, but she dismissed the thought. No assassin or thief should have that much power. She considered what to do next, reminding herself that she had to fulfill Irigami's order no matter what. Still, she didn't want to involve her teammates, so she concluded she had no choice but to isolate Yukari in the boss room. She was confident Naruse would follow her lead and decided to leave Utio outside. Calmly, she asked how long they planned to keep arguing, then informed them that they should scout the boss room first if they wanted to win. She ordered Yuto to stay behind, claiming he was too on edge. Utio protested, shouting that he could increase the casting speed of his spells, but she reminded him that his magic was already at its limit, rendering him speechless. She then stated that while Yukari still had stamina and backup items, he couldn't fight while protecting two people. She ordered Yuto to take a break and cool his head. Although irritated, Yuto knew she was right and sat down quietly while the others proceeded into the boss room. An hour later, after roaming around, Naruse finally asked where the boss room was. Kumori noted that there hadn't been any monsters around either. Yukari looked toward Lulort, asking if she noticed anything. Lulu Hart replied that there was a huge monster nearby, but the fog was blurring its presence or it was in pieces. She added that it was close. That made Yukari wonder if monsters could move in groups, recalling that one of the golems he fought earlier had shown signs of intelligence. He started piecing the information together and was horrified by what he realized. Elsewhere in the dungeon, Uto spotted a stray golem. Its body was damaged, alone, and on the verge of collapse. He wondered if Yukari had done it, but dismissed the idea. There was no way a first year like Yukari could have managed that. He approached the golem, thinking himself lucky. Confident he could take on a dying golem, Uto gripped his key tag tightly. He was determined to gain some experience points. He needed the money. A few days earlier in the hospital, Uto had been furious when he saw the bills. The doctor warned him that without treatment, his sister only had 3 more years to live. It terrified him. But when he checked his bank passbook, the money he had saved for her surgery had been withdrawn. He had a strong suspicion who had taken it. He rushed to confront his father, who was lying around lazily. When questioned, his father casually replied that he had borrowed the money. Uto shouted at him, saying the money was for Kaned's surgery, demanding to know what he had done with it. His father teasingly answered that he'd used it to buy alcohol and have a little fun. Enraged, Uto punched the wall and shouted that even if his father had abandoned them, he could protect Kaned by himself. He told him to disappear from their lives, but his father didn't take him seriously. Laughing, he walked away, telling him to just work harder. Back in the present, Uto knew he didn't have time. Killing one golem would be enough to push him to B rank. It wasn't much, but it was enough to qualify for a higher tier guild with perks that could earn him the money he needed for Kaned's treatment. He despised the world, calling it garbage, and decided never to rely on anyone again. He activated his magic power and struck the golem with his hydro spike. It shattered into pieces with a single hit. He calmly approached the remains, confident that as an elementalist, he could take on many attribute classes by exploiting their weaknesses. But he was stunned when he saw the shattered pieces begin to move. A wave of horror swept over him as he felt a powerful presence awaken. Just as he feared, the dungeon boss appeared before him. That's when he realized why the boss had been so difficult to find. Yu immediately tried to retreat, but before he could, the boss swung its massive fist and punched him across the room. He slammed into the wall and couldn't believe the boss's speed. It had grown much faster. He tried to stand, but his leg was severely injured. As the boss approached, he watched helplessly, thinking bitterly that nothing ever went right in this world, that everyone and everything was trash. The boss raised his fist to finish him. Powerless, Uto lifted the key tag his sister had given him, trying to call out to Kaned as his vision faded. Fortunately, Yukari arrived in time and caught the golem's fist with one hand. He tells that he understood. He wanted to rank up and gain experience, but Yukari asked him just once to let him help. Yukari then realized that each of the golems he had fought earlier was a fragment of the boss golem. He snapped back to attention when Uto shouted at him to be careful, making him notice the boss's other fist coming toward him. He immediately stopped it with his other hand and pushed it away from Uto. Shifting his weight onto his back legs and lowering his hips, he struck the golem with full force, shattering one of its arms and pushing it back. It was tougher to defeat than the golems they had encountered on the way, but for Yukari, it wasn't impossible. However, he was surprised when the boss regenerated its destroyed arm. Lulu Heart informed him that since the boss golem was formed by combining golems, regeneration was not unusual, but that didn't make it invincible. He then activated his soul trial ability to increase his mana and applied debuffs to himself. Raising his fist, he punched the boss, then immediately activated Lost Man to remove the debuffs and punched again. The force of the strike pushed the boss backward, and before it could respond, Yukari unleashed a rapid barrage of strikes. Uto was stunned by his movements and wondered if Yukari was truly the same conch as them. The others arrived shortly after, and Naruse admitted that he thought that they had caught up. But if they joined the fight now, they'd only get in the way. They stood back and watched Yukari dominate the boss. Kumori couldn't believe what she was witnessing. She observed that the efficiency of Yukari's mono circuits was on a completely different level than theirs. She was amazed at the amount of mana he was releasing and questioned what kind of mana absorption and circulation efficiency could produce such power, especially when the number of mana circuits should be the same among them. The boss growled in frustration and summoned its soldier golems. They realized the boss had mass summoned its golems, and once it finished, ordered them to attack Yukari's seniors. Yukari immediately looked back and summoned Harble, who responded with a wave of apathy, stunning all the golems. Yukari rushed in, destroying them one by one with single blows. Uito couldn't believe that he had summoned a familiar capable of using action-inhibiting magic, an area of effect stun with such long duration. It was overwhelmingly superior to his own magic, leaving him to question whether Yukari was supposed to be a warrior class or a summoner. Meanwhile, Yukari summoned his S-rank summons, Skull Lich Lord and Water Element, and ordered them to protect his seniors. Both summons complied. Kumori was shocked that he could summon multiple spirits at once, and that each of them was stronger than the entire team. While still in battle, Yukari noted that with the mana he had gained from Serendiana, he could summon multiple souls. Although it was still difficult for him to use their unique magic, he was confident his summons could act as effective guards. He asked Lulu Heart if it was all right to summon them for that purpose. She replied that it was fine as long as he wasn't using them offensively, but reminded him that he had to defeat the boss himself. Smiling, he agreed and charged the boss. He punched it in the stomach and noticed that it could be damaged. However, despite the significant damage, the boss regenerated instantly. He began to question whether there was any limit to its regeneration. Still, he believed there had to be a trick to defeating it. He decided to change his approach and look for a weak point. He kicked its legs, punched its belly, and smashed its head. But all of his efforts were in vain. The boss regenerated every single time. He glanced at Lulu Heart, who was silently observing him, and recalled her lecture that he must think for himself, fight, overcome adversity, and achieve victory. He understood now he had to become capable on his own. Calming himself, he pushed through his thoughts. He then ordered Water Element to activate her water prison ability. She responded by casting Aqua Globe containing the prison. While she was busy holding the spell, Yukari rushed toward the boss's arm and gripped it tightly. He pulled with all his strength and managed to tear the arm off. The boss screamed in pain, but he ignored it, knowing that even if he completely shattered the arm, it would only regenerate again. He lifted the detached limb and threw it toward Water Element. He decided that they needed to prevent the pieces from reassembling. Water Element imprisoned the boss's arm in her water prison, and he ordered her to keep the fragments isolated. She winked in confirmation. Turning back to the boss, he told it that it could no longer regenerate. Activating Soul Trial, he warned the golem that he was about to destroy it. Yukari then punched the boss's left arm to sever it and threw it into the water prison. He struck its torso and continued attacking relentlessly, placing each severed piece into the water prison as he went. Lulu Heart was surprised that Yukari would use the water prison solely to prevent regeneration. She noted that he wasn't attacking mindlessly, but was instead searching for a more efficient approach. She was impressed and amazed at the rate of mana absorption, the efficiency of his mana circuits, and the strength of Yukari's soul were all coming together perfectly. This led her to consider that it might be time to send Yukari back into the Lulu Heart dungeon, as the situation there was likely growing more serious by now. With no more regenerating stone fragments, the boss had shrunk considerably. Yukari was glad that using the water prison had succeeded. He dashed toward the boss at top speed, knowing he only needed to finish it off with a single high-powered strike. Inhaling deeply to calm himself, he decided to limit his soul usage to 20%. He then raised his fist, fueled with his soul, and used his soul burst ability to punch the boss. The boss was launched backward, and its core was destroyed, killing it instantly. Yukari had defeated the dungeon boss, Red Golem, and it dropped the golem pendulum. Though no soul core was dropped, he was satisfied. He had succeeded in controlling the high-cost soul burst skill, which consumes one's soul to trigger a magical explosion and slows mana recovery. He recalled that during his battle with Serendiana, he had used up his entire soul and could no longer continue fighting. But now he had managed to regulate the consumption, allowing him to remain combat ready. Naruse approached him from behind, praising him as something else, and figuring out that he was the one who had taken down the horde of golems a few hours earlier. Yukari admitted that it was him and asked if they could keep it a secret, as he didn't like standing out. Naruse thought he was humble and said it was a waste. His strength would be in high demand. Utio then acknowledged that he had underestimated Yukari. He confessed that he had prioritized his personal matters, which ended up burdening Yukari. Utio then bowed and sincerely apologized, startling Yukari. Utio noticed Yukari's injured hand and suspected that he had pushed himself too far. Yukari looked at his hand in confusion and realized he hadn't noticed the injury because of the lost man's skill, which nullified pain. He stared at it, knowing it was now useless, but he didn't care. He simply reminded himself to be careful when using Soul Burst, as losing use of an arm every time would become a serious problem. He smiled and assured Utio that as long as he could protect everyone, losing an arm was a small price to pay. Yu was stunned by what he heard, but before he could respond, Yukari pulled something out of his pocket and handed the key tag back to him, telling Yo that he had his own reason for becoming stronger. Uito responded that he understood and hoped they both could achieve their goals. On the other hand, Kumori began to understand why Irogami had her eyes on Yukari. But from the perspective of someone affiliated with the Holy Dungeon Church, it was not necessarily a good thing. Still, Kumori decided to set the thought aside. She knew that an interesting junior had just joined them, and she couldn't help but be intrigued. Meanwhile, in the church used her saint dominance, a skill that allowed her to control the vision of subordinate sisters and observe Yukari from a distance. She confirmed that Yukari's mana had already reached the level of an A-rank mage. He was forcefully enhancing his physical strength by channeling his abundant mana, leading her to wonder just how much experience he had accumulated to reach such a level. What intrigued her more, however, was that despite having C-rank level mana circuits, Yukari was manipulating A-rank level mana. She knew that with only 8 C-rank circuits, there should be a strict limit to how much mana one could handle. That left her questioning how Yukari was compensating for it. She proudly declared that it was endlessly fascinating. Turning to the man standing in front of her, she asked if he agreed. Kayakuzuki and Frank, with the nightmare skill, agreed in a sinister voice that Yukari was indeed the best. His tone made happy. She said she was glad to see him understand Yukari's value, which made rescuing him worthwhile, even if it meant crossing Hyakuren and earning Sakurako's resentment. She then asked for his opinion and suggested that he abandon his boring habit of newbie hunting and get himself a class. He replied that he didn't hunt newbies for fun. It was just the quickest way to dissect players. What he truly wanted was to understand what skills and classes were and where they originated. Laughed and called him a wonderful philosopher. She told him that with his ambition and talent, it was only a matter of time before he reached S rank. He then asked her if she was really sure about letting him dissect Yukari, even though Yukari was her favorite. Excitedly, she told him to call her when that time came, explaining that she too was curious about what was inside Yukari. He sighed, realizing that Irogami was genuinely looking forward to it. He asked how he could obtain one of those classes, and she assured him she had the perfect method. He only needed to leave it to her. She then enthusiastically explained the method to Akazuki. He smiled, thinking it was a crazy idea, but he also understood why Irogami was feared as a witch. Akazuki knelt in front of her as they sealed their deal and confirmed that he would serve under her. From the day Akazuki had lost to Yukari, he had never forgotten the look in his eyes. He wanted to see him again, to meet him, and to discover what was inside him. Akazuki swore that the one who would dissect Yukari would be him. The next morning, Kuzuki Fujimin, in F-class rank with the Manhwa skill, and Yukari's best friend, greeted him. Fujimini informed him that he had ranked up to C-class and said he never thought someone like him, with no skill, would rise that far. Fujimini was Yukari's one and only best friend. He did possess a skill, but he had never chosen to live as a player because he believed he was just an average guy who couldn't risk his life going on adventures. Because of that belief in the world before regression, Fujimin had tried to stop Yukari from becoming a player and constantly reminded him that he had neither the talent nor a skill. Yukari recalled how Fujim had hardened his heart and discouraged him from chasing his dreams. He was lost in those memories when Fujimin called out and softly slapped his back, telling him not to zone out. Fujimin then proudly declared that Yukari was a celebrity now, a prodigy, the first since Sakurako to reach C-class in under a year. But Yukari irritably told him to cut the flattery and get to the point. Fujimin asked what favor Yukari wanted, and Yukari replied that he wanted him to team up with him. Fujimin asked if it was just to fill a party slot, which Yukari confirmed, explaining that to challenge a C-class or higher dungeon, they needed more than one person. He convinced Fujimin by saying he didn't need to enter the dungeon and could just wait at the entrance. Fujimini agreed, saying he wanted to see if Yukari had really gotten stronger. That thought alone made him excited. Yukari was about to suggest a date when Fujimin interrupted, stating that he would be coming into the dungeon too. Yukari was shocked to hear that from his friend, someone once afraid of becoming a player, and asked why. Fujim replied that he didn't care much about being a player or any of that, but he cared about Yukari and wanted to see him fight as the guy who used to be stuck as a no-skill. Yukari was stunned for a moment, but with no other choice, he agreed. He then called Lulu Hart to ask her for permission to go all out this time so that Fujimin wouldn't get hurt and could feel safe. She agreed and informed him that she would act separately from him this time because she had a few matters to take care of. He was confused. It was rare for her to act on her own, but decided not to question it and just asked her to return soon. As Lulu Hart left while he chatted with his best friend, she knew it was time to let Yukari start practicing independence. She had always wanted to watch over Yukari until the end of that world. but unfortunately, it was something she could not do. The next day, in the C-class dungeon, Umecho and Sierra were together. Saya rushed toward the goblins in front of her and slashed them using her maid's culinary techniques. She easily defeated a few of them, but more goblins kept appearing. In no time, 6 goblins were approaching. She activated her maid's work tools, which materialized exclusive maid equipment and summoned various items. She took out 5 shining long swords. Kicking 3 of the swords at the goblins in front, she threw one from her hand into the goblin in the middle, successfully piercing its head. She then dashed at the 2 remaining goblins and slashed them down together, defeating all 6 without breaking a sweat. Umeo, watching from behind, was amazed by Sierra's precision and seriously impressed. Still, she knew she had to work hard too. Gathering strong energy in her blade, she shouted to Sierra that everything was set. Yume's skill, Elegant Intercept, allowed her to switch positions with a designated party member, boosting her speed for a limited time. Sarah immediately dashed out of the way, and when the path was clear, Umecho swung her blade down. The unleashed power shattered the goblins and cleared the way. Moments later, as they were collecting the drops, Umecho praised Sarah for moving like she was threading a needle and asked how she did it. Sarah replied that her class was Maid, which had an ability called flawless movement, allowing her to perfectly replicate any movement she imagined. Asked if that meant she could never make a mistake and teased her, calling it cheating. Sarah responded that Umio's skill was even more incredible. Umio then proudly asked if she met her genius class and explained that as long as she met the requirements, she could learn any class, something that really helped with her short attention span. Sierra complimented her again, saying that her skill was insane. Umeko, lacking any sense of humility, confidently agreed. She went on to say that there were limitations. For instance, she had tried out Assassin during the last expedition, but it didn't suit her. Then she tested the Race Saber class, which felt better, but the charge time for attacks was too long, so she decided not to use it again. Sarah realized that Umecho adapted her class depending on the dungeon, and her talent was the ability to instantly master any class. Without a doubt, she thought was a genius with the potential to reach rank someday. Umeko then asked what Sarah thought Yukari's class might be. Sierra admitted she had been wondering the same thing, but had no idea. Was surprised, even Sierra didn't know. She recalled that just before entering the dungeon at Oryu Guild, Kira had informed her that the first floor of the Lulu Heart dungeon had been cleared. Based on what he sensed, over 20 guilds and factions had gathered there. She was shocked. She hadn't noticed anything at all, but Kira explained that was because they had advanced scouting and stealth abilities. He also informed her that all those forces were closely observing the battle between Sakurako and Irigami, and at the center of that battle was Yukari. She was horrified to hear this, realizing that it meant Yukari was in serious danger. Kira added that the reason so many strong players fought with him, caught in the middle, was because they were interested in him. That alone made Yukari a key figure in their world. Kira also explained that if he, as the master of the Uru Guild, were to approach Yukari any further, it would be like publicly declaring Yukari as someone of importance. Umeo understood what her brother was telling her and realized that this was where she came in. Kira agreed and said he wanted her to officially investigate Yukari on behalf of the Oryu Guild. Kira firmly ordered her to figure out who Yukari really was, what kind of skill and class he possessed, and most importantly, the hidden secret that lay between Yukari and the Lulu Heart dungeon. At the same time in the C-class dungeon, he warned Fujim never to leave Harbel's side and told Harbel that he was counting on her to watch over Fujimin, to which Harbel agreed. Fujimin commented that Harbel was cute and assumed Yukari's class was a summoner. Yukari explained that he could do something similar and assured him that Harbel was incredibly strong, which meant staying close to her would keep him safer. Fujim extended his hand to greet Harbel respectfully, and before Harbel could move, Yukari warned her not to bite Fujimin. A moment later, Umecho and Sierra were hiding nearby when they felt a strong presence even from a distance and noticed that Harbel's magical power was outrageous. Sarah also realized that Harbel was not at a C-rank level. It was far above, and she guessed it could be a rank or even S-rank potential. Umeko asked if Harbel was communicating, noting that they had a summoner in their guild too, but summoned monsters usually acted like puppets. Sarah agreed with Umeko, stating that was how summons should typically behave. At first, when Umeko asked Sarah to help investigate Yukari, she felt uneasy about it, but now that she was witnessing Yukari's strength firsthand, she understood Umecho and figured that from that day on, Yukari would become a target for many factions. Umeo admitted that when her brother told her Yukari might have cleared the first level of the Lulu Heart dungeon, she thought it had to be a joke. But now she believed it was true and asked if they should head back to report to her brother. However, Sarah disagreed and told Yumameko they should watch just a little longer, as removing the danger surrounding Yukari would require a clearer understanding of his true strength. Sarah knew she had been protected many times during dungeon raids. Even if her strength couldn't match Yukari's now, she still wanted to find a way to protect him and be someone brave enough to defend others as Yukari did. Umeko agreed and informed her that the class she had chosen was Shadow Stalker, which had high stealth capabilities. But with a monster like Harble, who was stronger than both of them, getting any closer would definitely get them noticed. The two girls decided to continue observing from a distance for the time being. Meanwhile, Yukari knew they couldn't afford any mistakes in the dungeon ruin and decided to be extra cautious, prioritizing safety above all. He summoned Soul Servitude, Armored Knight Soul, Skull Guardian Soul, Flame Knight Soul, and Skull Lich, Lord Soul, all at once and ordered them to explore the dungeon. He instructed them that if there were monsters, they should defeat them all. The summons agreed. Yukari was confident that his summons were stronger than ever due to his increased magical power. Before dismissing them, he added that if there were too many enemies, they should retreat immediately. Their goal was safe, consistent progress, and the summons acknowledged that as well. Fujim, stunned by the terrifying appearance of the soul summons, told Yukari they looked horrifying. Yukari reassured him that the summons were loyal and actually pretty good guys, making Fujimin realize how much Yukari trusted them. It showed that Yukari had clearly been through many dungeons. A moment later, the summons began exploring. As they roamed the dungeon, they encountered a group of lizard monsters. The lizard men immediately attacked, but the summons blocked the attacks. Behind them, the Flame Knight appeared and charged at the lizard man. When it resisted, the Flame Knight ignited its blade with fire, startling the enemies. Before they could retreat, the Flame Knight beheaded them. One lizard man tried to escape, but was shocked to find the Skull Lich Lord blocking its path. The Lich Lord raised its axe and sliced the lizard man in half in a single swing, then decapitated the other escaping monsters. Meanwhile, the two girls watched from their hiding spot, noticing that Yukari's summons fought on their own. Umeko asked Sierra to confirm that the Skull Lich Lord had once been a C-rank dungeon boss, which Sarah affirmed. However, she also noted that it was now even stronger than before. She wondered if Yukari's class could strengthen monsters, and was surprised to see that the summons appeared to have their own will. Hours later, Yukari informed Fujimin that they had mostly cleared the surrounding area and could now proceed. Fujimin was confused, reminding him that he had just been standing around the whole time. Yukari explained that the summons had handled all the fighting. Fujimin was amazed to hear that and asked if Yukari didn't even have to fight directly. Yukari simply said that he still needed to confirm the kills and collect materials. As they walked, Fujimin asked how much crank monster materials were worth. Yukari replied that it depended on the type of monster and the condition of the materials. For every 10 monsters, the total value could reach several million yen if the materials were of high quality. Fujimin was shocked. Frustrated, Fujimin said that frank materials barely sold for over 10,000 yen. Yukari explained that although frank materials had more utility, materials from C-rank in higher dungeons could be used to craft powerful weapons and armor, or even generate rare items. Naturally, the rarer the materials, the more attention they attracted from collectors. He also informed Fujimin that while the current dungeon didn't seem to contain any, if they found magic stones, the value would skyrocket. That made Fujimin feel disheartened, realizing that his daily wage of 8,000 yen felt rather pitiful by comparison. He asked Yukari if he planned to keep farming C-rank dungeons to make money. Yukari responded that he didn't plan to stop at C-rank dungeons, which confused Fujimin even more. He asked if Yukari wasn't already strong enough. Yukari replied that he wasn't. He still considered himself weak and needed to become much stronger. Fujimin was surprised but accepted it. Then Yukari was suddenly startled when one of his summoned monsters was defeated. Fujimin worriedly asked if it was a stronger monster. Yukari immediately ran and guessed it was the dungeon boss's doing. He ordered Harble to retreat. A few minutes later, they reached the dungeon boss room and saw one boss with 10 underlings. Yukari thought he might be overreacting, but he couldn't afford even the slightest mistake, not with Fujimin at risk. He reminded himself that it was better to be safe than sorry. He activated Soul Servitude again, manifesting Harble, Water Elemental, Thunder Elemental, and fire elemental souls. Fujimin couldn't believe he was summoning even more. The two girls, watching from afar, realized that these were different summons from before. Both were stunned, understanding now what Kira meant when he spoke of Yukari's power. Meanwhile, Yukari focused entirely on defeating the enemies, precisely and safely, giving everything he had as he stared into the eyes of the dungeon boss. He then ordered his summons to support him as he headed for the boss in the middle and told Harble to take care of Fujimini. Both girls were shocked to see that he would take on so many enemies head-on and were worried, knowing it was suicidal, but they didn't stop him. He dashed toward the enemies, determined to finish it as fast as he could. One of the lizard men tried to swing its blade at him to stop his charge, but before it could land a hit, the fire element burned it to death. Yukari ran past it, shocking the other lizard men. He then swung his sword forward, chopping off the head of another lizard man who was in his way. The boss, seeing its soldiers scared, growled in anger. With no other choice, the remaining lizard men rushed in to stop him. But unfortunately for them, the water and lightning elements stepped forward and electrocuted and drowned them to death. Thanks to them, in just a few minutes, Yukari reached the boss. He leapt at full speed, appearing behind it with his sword lifted high, and swung it down on the boss, slashing it continuously within seconds. Fujimin was amazed as he watched. When Yukari was done, he looked around to check the area for safety. He calmed down when Fujimin shouted proudly that it was over in an instant, and praised him for being so strong. Fujimin then approached him, asking if he was right in thinking Yukari beat the boss, and said they should head back. Yukari simply agreed, but something didn't sit right with him. He found it strange, knowing that a monster at the level of that lizard man boss shouldn't have been able to defeat the Skull Lich Lord. He recalled the Skull Lich Lord telling him his magic was stronger now, confirming that he was indeed more powerful than before. Yet something still felt off. He wondered if there was something else going on. On the other hand, the girls were amazed that Yukari had finished the C-class dungeon so fast. Sarah couldn't believe Yukari had cleared the Lulu Heart dungeon like that. What amazed her even more was that not only did Yukari defeat boss-level monsters, but those monsters didn't even stand a chance. Whispered that Yukari was strong when they had done a dungeon together, but back then he wasn't this ridiculously powerful. They both guessed that Yukari might be using power from the Lulu Art dungeon monsters. As they watched from afar, they were left trying to piece it together. Yukari's overwhelming strength made them feel something close to fear. Later out on the street, Yukari and Fujimin were walking peacefully after selling the drop items and monster corpses. Yukari then saw Lulu Heart floating in front of him. He quietly asked her if her business was done, and she replied that it had ended earlier than expected and that she had handled the rest. She then asked him if she was right in assuming he noticed them, to which he replied yes, and shouted to the girls that they could come out. The girls awkwardly walked out of a nearby alley. He told them he had sensed them inside the dungeon, and Sarah immediately explained that they didn't do anything to feel guilty about. He calmly assured her that he believed them and that they were probably just worried about him and Fujimine, earning a look of disbelief from Lulu Heart. Umeko, feeling guilty, quickly agreed and nervously shouted that C-class dungeons are dangerous. He then asked if they had sensed anything disturbing back in the dungeon, which shocked Lulu Heart. Umea responded that she hadn't noticed anything, and Sierra said the same. Suddenly, the sky above them opened and a huge demon eye appeared. A powerful magic circle materialized in the air. Yukari panicked upon feeling the massive surge of magical energy. Knowing that something incredibly dangerous was coming, his instinct to protect everyone activated immediately. Dark power began to spread around them, and before it could manifest fully, Lulu Heart rushed him to use his Lost Lust ability. Confused, he asked what was happening, but Lulu Heart just shouted that she would explain later. He agreed and immediately activated Lost Man to erase the lust. Multiple magic circles then appeared in the sky, unleashing a powerful force that destroyed everything in the area. The energy splashed in their direction, and before it could hit the others, Yukari blocked it with all his might. But it was too strong. He was slammed into a nearby building, leaving his friends deeply worried about him. Lulu Heart proudly told him that even in an unexpected situation, he stayed calm, and she praised him for how much he had grown. He confirmed that with that level of magic, even one mistake would have killed him. He then asked Lulu Heart if she knew what was going on because he wanted to understand the situation. She informed him that a demon king had come to meet them, and hearing that made him feel a chill of fear. She explained that before his regression, the world had gone straight to hell, and the real cause behind all the dungeon breaks was the one who ruled the S-class dungeon, the pinnacle of Septim Milani, corrupted by lust. She added that the disease that spread through solitude was the demon king of lust, and she had come for him. The demon lord of lust then introduced herself as Kararan, the ruler of the dragonkin. Her race was a dragon succubus hybrid, and she was affiliated with September Magnus. She greeted both Lulu Heart and Yukari. Yukari was surprised that Kararian could see Lulu Heart, but Lulu Heart calmly praised Carmian's flashy entrance and asked if she wanted something from her. Kararian replied that she had come to erase her, asking what other reasons she could possibly have. Yukari realized that Kararian's target was Lulu Heart and asked why she was after her, but Kararian simply asked if she really needed to kindly and politely explain anything to someone about to die. Lulu Heart teasingly asked if she truly believed Yukari would lose to someone like her, which angered Carmian. She snapped that Lulu Heart talked big for someone barely clinging to life. Kararian then taunted them to take her hellfire and assured them that if they survived, she would answer their questions. Lulu Heart informed Yukari that among all the demon lords, the demon of lust was the strongest. However, forcing herself out of the dungeon must have limited her power. She assured Yukari that she would read Kararian's movements and give him directions. She told him to focus on her thoughts and her voice because they would defeat Kararian together. He simply replied that he understood, trusting Lulu Heart more than anyone. He was ready to face Karm, but then she disappeared, startling him. Lulu Heart immediately looked around, but Kararan reappeared on his right side and aimed her fire at him. He panicked but managed to raise his hand in time. Yet Kararian cast her spell faster, releasing a strong fire blast that exploded around them. Sierra called out to him in worry while Umeko tried to evacuate the others. The two girls attempted to attack the barrier, but they couldn't get close. Even their attacks were deflected. Umeko shouted that Karmarian's power was too fast to follow with the naked eye, and Sarah realized the battle in front of her was on a whole other level. She immediately pulled out her phone and contacted someone, knowing she had to at least do what she could. Meanwhile, Karm looked at her hand in confusion and admitted that the magical gap between them was overwhelming. She had struck first, a blow that should have left not even dust behind. Yet Yukari had survived thanks to the fire element. She gave him credit for that. Yukari noticed that even during battle, Carmine was calmly analyzing everything while they were fighting for their lives. Lulu Heart shouted to Kararian that Yukari had withstood her hellfire and ordered her to answer their question. Kararian teased them, asking if they were really that curious, then mocked them for trying to come up with an escape strategy while she spoke. Yukari shot back, asking if she was so weak she couldn't even keep a promise, which angered her further. But she regained her composure and admitted that her real target was Lulu Heart and the Arst rank 1. Lulu Heart dungeon because Lulu Heart was its king. Lulu Heart asked how she found out where she was, and Kararian replied that all dungeons where dragon reside fall under her domain. That was why she had cast out antennae across every dungeon she controlled. Thanks to that response, Yukari figured out that Karm was the one who had defeated the Skull Lich Lord in the dungeon. The magic of the souls they had recruited in the Luluart dungeon had attracted her. Karmarian smiled and taunted them, expressing disappointment that the demon lord who ruled the Luluart dungeon had such weak magic, just a hollow shell of power. Lulu Heart, irritated by Kararian's boasts, decided to try rattling her. She landed on Kararian's side and calmly asked if they weren't in the same boat. Leaning in closer, she teased that with the current level of her magic, there was no way she'd be causing a dungeon break anytime soon. Carmian was stunned and furiously asked how she knew. Lulu Heart responded teasingly that she could see through the kind of thoughts a weakling like her would have, and called her pathetic for teaming up with others because she couldn't reach Lulu Heart's level alone. Kararian couldn't believe what she was hearing and began to suspect that the other demon lords had betrayed her. Thanks to her reaction, Lulu Heart managed to read that Carrion didn't fully trust her allies. However, her taunts had pushed Carmian too far. Carm decided to just kill them immediately. Lulu Heart was caught off guard when she saw Carmarian appear behind Yukari and quickly ordered him to get down. Carm attempted to slice his head off, but he managed to duck in time. She tried again to slash him in half, but once more he narrowly avoided it. Lulu Heart shouted for him to jump, and he rushed to obey, avoiding being crushed. Kararian activated a fire magic circle in the air and rained fireballs on him. He managed to summon the fire element to shield himself from the flames. Lulu Heart warned him that Kararan was charging in, and when he looked up, he saw her closing in fast. She swung her scythe down at him, and he managed to block it with his sword, but she was far stronger than him, and he couldn't hold out long. He forcefully pushed her scythe away, which sent him stumbling backward. Before he could recover, Lulu Heart shouted for him to get up and dash forward, which he did immediately. But Kararian appeared right in front of him again and mocked him for being too slow. However, Lulu Heart confidently told Kararan that they had already won. Strong threads had wrapped around Karmarian's scythe and her body. Karm realized that this had been Lulu Heart's plan all along. She had initially thought Lulu Heart was just oddly chatty until she saw Sakurako calmly sitting on a rock holding the threads that had trapped her. Ignoring Kararan, Sakurako asked Yukari how many times she was going to have to save him. Just then, Kira approached, telling Sakurako not to say it like that. Being alive was already a miracle. Sarah Kagurazaka, an S-rank player with an unknown class and skills who also worked as a player association receptionist, agreed. Sarah reminded Sakurako that Yukari fought well against a Demon Lord class monster and deserved praise. Hirataro Odachi, an S-rank player ranked 18th with the Swordmaster class and Blade skill, also agreed, saying that he had heard rumors. But Yukari exceeded all expectations. Kuchiro then appeared behind them and praised Yukari for moving like a pro against a demon lord. Kira approached Yukari and asked if he could still fight. Yukari confidently replied, "Yes." Karmarian glared at them all in fury, but they remained calm. Together, they prepared to slay a demon lord. Kira was amazed to see the ruler of the S-rank dungeon and the strongest demon lord species. While beside him, Sarah praised Yukari for being impressive earlier and for deflecting Karmarian's attacks all on his own, something most people couldn't do. However, she told him that they would take over and to leave it to them. Yet Yukari didn't agree and expressed his wish to fight alongside them. He explained to Sarah that Karm uses powerful flame magic and teleportation, and that he has a way to detect her teleportation locations, which means he can be useful. Sarah paused to consider and then replied that she couldn't believe he was just an F rank not long ago. Fortunately, she agreed to let him join the fight. However, she warned him that even a single demon lord is enough to bring the world to ruin, and at the same time, she assured him that luckily they had a gathering of S-rank players present. Sarah then informed everyone of the formation. She and Kia would provide support. Kira and Kiritara would take the front lines. Umeko and Sierra would guide civilians to safety, and Sakurako would prepare the Grand Barrier. Yukari forced himself to stay calm and reminded himself that everyone there was a higher rank than him. He then activated his lost man's skill to suppress the feeling of panic, and once more told himself that the reason he was able to fight in that situation was because he had already seen Karm's attacks. He pushed himself to use his head, predict everyone's movements, and make the best possible move. Meanwhile, Karm realized she had been played. The players had hidden their presence to lure her into that exact situation. Lulu Heart noticed Kararian's reaction and could tell she was howling with her thoughts. She then teasingly showed the invitations and whispered to Kararian that if she let her sneak into a dungeon belonging to lizard men, a distant kin of dragonkind, she knew she'd come running, which is why she had gathered the Shranks in advance. However, instead of being angry, Kararian smiled and responded that the world would belong to her eventually. But for now, she would watch what kind of power native humans held. Kararian threw her scythe away and taunted them, saying she wouldn't use her weapons or the power of dragons. And even then, she would snuff out every last one of them. She added that she would go easy on them and dared them to come at her with everything they had. Kira dashed forward and attacked Karmian with his Crimson Lotus War Dance ability, but she easily blocked it with her arm. Kira shouted to Yukari to sync with him, and Yukari immediately responded by dashing forward and swinging his sword at Karmarian's other side. Kyochiro, observing from a distance, noted that Yukari was even better than the rumors suggested and was keeping up with the movements of Shranks just fine. Sarah then released her Sparkle Starlight to support the front line, but before it could reach Karm, she cast a spell and burst the starlight apart. However, she overlooked Kiyotaro behind her, who slashed her hand. Kararian, at first confident it wouldn't damage her, was shocked when Kiyotaro slashed her hand again and it was cut off. Kararian was amazed that a mere human had severed her arm. Kiyotaro explained that her skill blade whisper can cut through anything, and not even a demon lord is an exception. Karmarian released magic at her severed arm and calmly stated that she had learned something new. Her arm regenerated, and within a second a magic circle appeared beneath Kitaro, while Karmian taunted that she had come too close. Yukari shouted to Kiritaro to jump, and she immediately acknowledged it, leaping into the air before a powerful flame capable of incinerating someone in seconds erupted from the magic circle. Thanks to Yukari's fire element summon, Kitaro took no damage. She praised Yukari for his good battle instincts and swung her sword down to slash Carmarian's head. But Carmarian, now enraged, easily dodged it. Kira attempted to strike Carm's open side, yet she still managed to block it with her arm. The three of them tried to attack her simultaneously, but she disappeared. Lulu Hart warned Yukari that Kararan was above them, and he immediately relayed the message to everyone. Kyoichiro was amazed that Yukari could actually read the Demon Lord's movements and used his curse technique, Frozen Sky, to block Karm's fire blast from above. Lulu Hart warned him again. Karm was coming after the fuzzy guy. Yukari immediately shouted to Kira, but he was too late. Kararian pierced her hand into Kira. Yukari shouted Kira's name in worry, but Kyoro calmly assured him that Kira wouldn't die from something like that. Kira then activated a powerful ability and managed to grab the Demon Lord. Kararian realized that Kira was a regenerating phoenix, and before she could break free from his grip, Kitaro and Yukari dashed toward her. As Kitaro closed in, Kararian hastily activated a magic circle to protect herself, overlooking Yukari. He rushed forward, aware that his physical ability was more than 2 levels below the S-rankers, which meant Kararian would naturally prioritize Kiritaro's attack. In that moment, an opening would appear for him. He activated his soul resonance ability, which synchronized with a soul under his control and allowed him to wield its power. By syncing with an S-rank monster, his stats would skyrocket, enabling him to use that powerful magic directly. Karm felt a strong danger approaching from her other side and turned in a rush. But what she saw shocked her. Yukari's magic power surging directly toward her. Unfortunately for him, she still managed to block his attack using her scythe, which startled him even more. He was sure he had boosted to S-rank status through his soul resonance. But even with the complex elemental magic memorized from the Serendiana battle, it still wasn't a fatal blow. Lulu Hart assured him that his spell was fine and explained that Kararan was using over 90% of her power just to manifest in that world. Thanks to his defensive spell, they were able to severely drain her mana. Kira was amazed that Yukari could use 2-element magic too, but Yukari was frustrated that he couldn't finish Kararan off and didn't have enough mana left to fight. Kira, however, boosted his confidence by pointing out that he managed to release that much power even with only 8 circuits in his C-ranked man flow, and that he had contributed more than enough. He added that Karm even panicked enough to pull out the weapon she said she wouldn't use. On the other hand, Karm realized she had been completely outplayed and looked at Yukari as unworthy of following in Lulu Hart's footsteps. Karm trembled in anger as she acknowledged she had disgracefully broken the rules she had set for herself by resorting to drawing her scythe. However, she suddenly began laughing uncontrollably, prompting Kira to ask the others if they had driven her mad from the pressure. Karm decided to reflect on her actions and floated into the air, opening a massive magic circle above her. She calmly warned them that she was going to get serious, startling everyone. Kira rushed to cover Yukari, and everyone gathered themselves to fight. Carmarian then calmly released Karma Catastrophe, and a tremendous force of power burst out from the magic circle, heading straight in their direction and destroying everything around them in just a second. When the power subsided and the destruction was laid bare, Yukari was lucky to still be alive. But he was horrified when he saw Kira standing in front of him, having taken the full damage for him. He panicked when Kira collapsed to the ground and could only ask him why he shielded him. Yukari rushed over and was relieved to find that Kira was still breathing. Meanwhile, Kararan, watching from above, was frustrated that even her strongest humanoid form attack couldn't kill him. She realized the dungeon's power to bind monsters was extremely strong. Calmly landing on the ground, she decided to take her time killing Yukari. Suddenly, 4 bright lights appeared above her. When she looked up, she was startled to see 4 foxwhale barriers rushing down toward her. As they landed, they unleashed the power of the spirit sky barrier. Kararian looked around in panic, but nearby, Sakurako calmly told Sarah that it was finally her turn. Sarah stepped forward, her crisis gauge ability finally full, which meant she could now go all out. Yukari was relieved to see the 2 girls were safe. Sarah apologized to him for putting such a burden on him, and sincerely regretted letting things reach such a disastrous point. She then explained that her class couldn't unleash its true power unless she was cornered, and she requested him to keep everything he saw confidential. Sarah then activated her class, and he was surprised to see her release such a bright and overwhelming power. As she began to transform, she explained that she hadn't wanted to transform at 30, one of the reasons she had retired from being a player. But given the situation, she had no choice but to go all out. She transformed into a cute magical girl and immediately unleashed her sparkle starlight toward Carmian. Remained calm at first, thinking it was the same attack from before. However, Sarah teased her, asking whether she really thought she could block the attack that easily. When Sarah's starlight hit the barrier Carrion had conjured to protect herself, the sheer power shocked her. She couldn't believe a human could wield that much magic. Then Sakurako activated her Foxfire, 8/10 bloom ability. From her barriers, powerful flames erupted and surged toward Carrion from all directions. She panicked, realizing there was no way to block all of the incoming attacks. The strikes hit her successfully, destroying her magic circle. Sarah commented to Sakurako that while the grand barriers were effective, they paid a heavy price. Sakurako explained that what the others did was only natural, and added that compared to countless S-rankers, she alone was stronger. Sakurako then ordered Yukari to stand up and not let Kira's sacrifice go to waste. She asked if he intended to accept defeat so disgracefully. He replied that he could still fight and forced his shaking legs to stand. He assured them that he would read all of Carrarion's moves precisely, and even if he died, he would not lose. Sarah released shooting stardust and a strong, brilliant power surged toward Carrarion. She managed to block it once more, but Sakurako followed up by adding his Fox Lightning 8/10 bloom to Sarah's attack, pushing Carrarion back even further. Within seconds, she could no longer withstand it, and her shield shattered into pieces. She realized that Sakurako's barriers not only weakened her physical form, but also amplified Sakurako's magic. Magic was being released from every Tori, making everything within the barrier a target. The sheer amount of magical power didn't feel human. Carrion had thought Sakurako was just a weakling, watching from the sidelines, but now she realized it had all been a ploy to buy time for summoning the Tori. Suddenly, Yukari appeared behind her, startling her. Though she still managed to block his slash with her scythe, she was surprised by how much Yukari's speed had increased. Even though she was supposed to be the stronger one, she noticed Yukari was following Lulu Heart's instructions precisely, which meant she still hadn't finished off Lulu Heart. Sarah praised Yukari for the well-timed flank and released shooting stardust again. Carrarion, knowing that taking it head-on would be fatal, immediately leapt away to avoid it. At the same time, Yukari and Lulu Heart both shouted that she was above them, surprising Lulu Heart, who noticed that Yukari was now reacting almost exactly as she predicted. Even in such a high battle, he was clearly growing stronger. Sakurako activated Foxfire. 8/10 bloom and a powerful tornado of flames reached toward Carrarion, but she vanished again. Yukari shouted a warning. Carmion had reappeared below Sierra. Acting fast, Sierra fired shooting stardust once more. Though Carrarion managed to shield herself, the force of Sierra's magic was too overwhelming and caused a massive explosion. Before she could recover, Yukari appeared behind her. This time, he unleashed his soul resonance attack, landing a direct hit and making Carrarion scream in pain. Carm is frustrated that everything was going completely off script. She wondered when exactly her dungeon break plan had been discovered. Her thoughts were jumbled and she chose to teleport away to create distance, but was shocked to find Yukari and Sarah already there. Having predicted her destination, they attacked her simultaneously. She tried to block with her shield, but the pressure from their combined assault was too much. Her shield finally shattered. From above, tornado flames descended once more. When they hit the ground, the impact caused large-scale destruction. Yukari was stunned that Sakurako could still cast such powerful magic after everything else, and noted that her mana hadn't dropped at all, exactly what he expected from the strongest player in the magic class. He also observed that Sarah's power wasn't limited to magic. Her speed and strength matched those of an S-rank warrior class. With them at his side, he began to feel sure they could win. However, a much larger and more ominous magic circle suddenly appeared in front of them, just as Carrarion vanished. Yukari panicked at the sight and stuttered, asking what was happening. Lulu Heart quietly answered, saying she had thought Carrion would retreat before it got to this point, but never imagined she would go that far. A powerful blast of energy erupted from the magic circle. Sarah rushed in front of Yukari to shield him. From within the circle, a massive claw began to emerge. A moment later, a piercing eye glared at them as a dragon's arm forced its way out. Yukari trembled in terror. He recognized the dragon from his past life. Just as he feared, the beast began to push its way out from the barrier, growling. Sakurako was in disbelief. Her barrier had cracked. Sarah too was stunned that Carrion still had enough power left to summon the dragon. Despite the fear, Yukari steeled himself and raised his sword, ready to fight once more. Lulu Heart smiled, pleased by his reaction. She had expected him to panic, but Yukari knew this time was different. In his past life, all he had done was run away. But now he had Lulu Heart beside him, and compared to his past, dying and returning over and over, he had become stronger. Kararan, who had borrowed the power of the dragon, rushed at them. And right away, Sarah cast a milky shield to protect him, but it was too heavy for her. It then swung its tail around, trying to destroy the barrier. Sakurako immediately attacked it with her tornado fires, but her attack just triggered it even more, and it rushed at her. Sakurako cast a quadruple barrier around herself, and Kararian tried to destroy it using its claws. Lulu Heart followed Yukari as he dashed away and told him that Sakurako was quite capable. He knew that even if Kararian was weakened to seal her meant Sakurako was allocating a huge amount of resources to maintaining the barrier and was also continuing to protect the humans who were too slow to escape inside it, which meant it was going to be a slow defeat for them. Sarah used her milky shield to back up Sakurako, but she couldn't handle Kararian's claw, and her shield was easily destroyed. Sakurako thought carefully for seconds, while Kararian kept trying to destroy her barrier. Sakurako then informed Sir that she was going to release her Ninetales, but Sira disagreed and warned her that if she released it, she wouldn't get out of it unscathed. However, Sakurako knew that it wasn't the time to be concerned about it, because the only thing that she absolutely could not allow was for any harm to come to her sister Sira. But Yukari interrupted her, saying that he had a plan and asked for their cooperation. Sakurako asked him what it was, and before he could answer, Sakurako ordered him to state the ideal and most optimal conditions, because there was nothing she couldn't do, and warned him that if he was useless, she would just release the Ninetales, to which he confidently replied that he understood. He then informed them that he wanted the Demon King to pay no attention to him, that they should stay in place and give him time to charge a big move, but he would have Sarah lend him her power.